ultimately a vaccine. A vaccine may take a year or more before it's available, but these other intermediate precautions must go into effect much, much faster. America must indeed reopen. When we do, these decisions must be based on local conditions, not an arbitrary nationwide timeline. Our governors and mayors understand their local conditions. They can make gradual, rolling, calibrated decisions in a way that is responsible when the tools to effectively fight this virus are ready and available. What I've outlined may seem like a daunting, even an impossible challenge, but our nation has overcome far greater challenges before. Already, America is rising to take on the China virus. The giant of American industry is awakening, retooling our factories to join this fight, just as we did during World War II. Never bet against America's workers and American ingenuity. And all across this country, Americans are springing into action. We know the vital role our doctors and nurses will play in the coming months, alongside our first responders, our factory workers and farmers, our grocers, and on down the list. Ask yourself now, how can you help? Can you keep your distance from those most at risk, realizing that the China virus preys on our most earnest desires for society and companionship? Can you offer your charity to a friend in need? Can you pick up groceries for your elderly neighbor? Can you keep your workers on payroll and benefits just a little longer till our legislation kicks in? Can you postpone your tenant's rent for a month? Can you pray for deliverance of our nation and the world? These are just a few of the things we must do as a country to make reopening possible and life bearable in the months ahead. We're all in this together, so we'll need to have each other's best interests at heart. Many years of comfort and ease have perhaps conditioned us to ask only what we're free to do, not what we're called to do. But the old disciplines of peril and privation threaten to return. We'll need old notions of duty to maintain order in the face of them. The darkest days of this crisis are, in all likelihood, still ahead of us. Let us face up to them bravely. Let us acknowledge the troubles ahead, and let us devote our whole energy to winning this battle quickly so that the normal life of our nation can resume. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, during times of disaster, crisis, or hardship, I never fail to be inspired by the generosity of Americans, including folks in my home state of Texas. I think about how we came together in the wake of Hurricane Harvey to lead search and rescue operations, clear debris, and rebuild communities and lives. We saw strangers forming human chains to rescue a driver trapped in a car, restaurants offering free meals to first responders, and a Houston legend known affectionately as Mattress Mac opening his furniture stores for those in need of shelter. One volunteer said, "I've met more of my neighbors in the last 24 hours than I have in the last 20 years. Well, these heartwarming stories of Texans lending a hand to one another are a source of comfort, even during the toughest times. Right now, when extending a physical hand is one of the worst things you can do, because it violates social distancing rules, there's still plenty of neighbors helping their neighbors. Folks in Texas, like around the country, are staying home to keep themselves and their neighbors safe. And we're seeing new and creative means of supporting one another. For example, a number of distilleries across the state have switched their production from vodka or whiskey to make hand sanitizer. With demand surging and hand sanitizer in short supply, more and more hospitals are struggling to keep it in stock, and these distilleries are stepping up to fill the void. Jonathan Lackerich is the head distiller and co-founder of the En Route Republic Distillery in Denison, Texas, and said they got a call from Texoma Medical Center asking if they could help. Of course, he said yes. But businesses like this aren't alone. Beloved Texas grocery chain, H-E-B, has taken steps to make shopping easier for seniors who are at most risk if they contract the coronavirus. H-E-B partnered with Favor Delivery to take grocery delivery, a service many Americans already utilize, and make it more accessible to seniors. They can pick up the phone, place an order, and have everything they need delivered to their front door within a few hours, all without having to leave home. We've also seen other organizations working to adapt to these challenging circumstances. The Boys and Girls Club of Greater Houston partnered with the Houston Food Bank to open a drive-through pantry. Families can get a whole week's worth of healthy meals without ever stepping out of the car. Of course, it's not just businesses and organizations who are helping out. People are helping other people. People are donating blood to alleviate the critical shortage that hospitals are facing. And all of us should consider, if we can, donating blood. They're leaving notes in neighbors' mailboxes offering to run errands and pick up supplies. On social media, school teachers that are at home are offering to help parents with their math, science, or other subjects that they may be struggling to teach their kids while they're at home and not at school. Neighbors helping neighbors, friends helping strangers, Texans helping Texans. That's one thing I love about this great country. Our communities always jump into action to help any way they can. They do what it takes to survive a crisis and keep one another safe and healthy until we emerge on the other side. Mr. President, it's time for the Senate to do its part. There's been no event in my lifetime that has had this big an impact on the physical and economic health of our country. Every day we learn about more new cases, rising unemployment, and unprecedented market volatility. We have a responsibility to act and to act quickly in response to this dueling crisis. Already, we were able to work and send 2 bills to the President's desk for signature. The first sent vital support to healthcare professionals and first responders who are doing everything they can to treat patients and prepare for more cases. We also provided initial funding for development of a vaccine, clinical trials, and more diagnostic tests. The second bill we passed focused more on the small businesses and the individual workers who are impacted economically. It included changes in unemployment insurance so that those who find themselves out of a job can promptly take advantage of these benefits, and made paid sick and family leave available for workers impacted by the virus. That's what we did in these first 2 bills. Were they perfect? Well, no. The second bill in particular fell short in a number of areas. It was largely negotiated by Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi. But we decided that in the interest of the greater good in the country and the people who were hurting during this crisis, that we in the Senate would pass it expeditiously. As the saying goes, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We acted quickly to get both bills to the president's desk because the circumstances demanded it. Sadly, over the last few days, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been oblivious to the sense of urgency that every other American seems to understand. After the original intense bipartisan negotiations, we were finalizing a third relief bill, which included, by definition, ideas from both Republicans and Democrats. We were optimistic that we'd be able to take up and pass the bill on Sunday, or at least get it started and pass the bill on Monday, but clearly that didn't happen. Our Democratic colleagues blocked us from even debating the bill, not once, but twice. The minority leader said the bill, which his members had helped write, wasn't good enough. He spent the next 3 days trying to change the bill to include provisions that he thought were more important priorities during a national emergency. Things like tax credits for solar panels and tighter emission standards for airlines, proposals that have absolutely nothing to do with this crisis. After a few incredulous days, America woke up to the news today that our Democratic colleagues are finally ready to stop this posturing and this obstruction and to get this job done. After blocking this bill twice and holding up this emergency lifeline, here's what the minority leader claims is a victory. He says the Democrats expanded unemployment insurance to help laid-off workers and those who are self-employed. But Mr. President, as we all know, that was already part of the bill that had been negotiated between Democrats and Republicans. Then the minority leader said Americans will get direct aid, but we've been talking about that for weeks. That was part of the bill that Democrats blocked twice. And let's be clear about this. Here we are, members of the United States Congress, getting a paycheck, and they have the temerity to block 2 times emergency aid to people who have no income at all through no fault of their own. It's outrageous. Then the minority leader said he secured unprecedented aid for America's hospitals, but as it turns out, that was part of the bill Democrats blocked twice. It was the subject of bipartisan negotiations, and we thought a consensus. Well, the bill that Democrats blocked twice was a bipartisan bill to begin with. Democrats and Republicans worked together and agreed to each of these points before the first votes were cast. The minority leader's members had spent countless hours negotiating with Republicans. That's how you get things done. But then he single-handedly tries to take credit for the work that they have done. For days, Democrats needlessly blocked a bill that would have bolstered our fight to defeat this virus and protected our economy in the process. I am absolutely angry that they chose to waste so much valuable time when there are so many different people in need. But I'm also relieved that they finally agreed to quit playing their partisan games so we can vote on this legislation today. This bill sends desperately needed funding to hospitals that are struggling to manage an influx of patients and helps fight the shortage of masks and other personal protective equipment, one of the priorities my governor had mentioned to me. It provides the direct financial assistance that was already in the 2 bills that our Democratic colleagues blocked. A family of 4 will receive up to $3,400 under this legislation, which will go a long way to throwing that lifeline to them and cover their rent, groceries, electric bills, and other expenses until they can make other arrangements, like apply for unemployment insurance under our beefed up provisions. This legislation will also provide relief for small businesses that are struggling to stay afloat. Many of these businesses have had to shut down because they've been ordered by the government to do so. And now they need some help to make sure that the jobs they currently provide will still be available when we get to the other side of this crisis. And particularly, we need to make sure that the employees they depend on and will depend on in the future will still be there when they reopen their doors. With both the physical and economic health of our country in crisis, this bold legislation is our best path forward. I appreciate the work that's been done by so many around the clock for the better part of the past week to get this bill finally to the floor. And I look forward to supporting it so that my constituents, the 29 million people that call Texas home, will get help as soon as possible. As we prepare to pass this legislation and send it to the House, I urge them to act quickly. But you may recall, Mr. President, it was Speaker Pelosi who flew back into town after a week-long recess, dropped an 1,100-page bill, and made all these outrageous new demands, clearing out their partisan or ideological outbox or wish list. Well, incredibly, now that there has been an agreement here in the Senate with the administration, Speaker Pelosi hasn't even called the House back into session. Matter of fact, they gavelled in session and out of session today, and they won't be back in session until tomorrow. Speaker Pelosi has a huge challenge. Unless she can get unanimous consent to pass a $2 trillion bill through the House, she may well have to call back into session the entire House of Representatives. With restricted flights because of the lack of demand and the cost cutting that airlines are going through, with the concerns about people sheltering in place, maintaining social distance and good hygiene to stop the spread of this virus, Speaker Pelosi has created a terrible problem for herself. But more importantly, she's created even more of a problem for the rest of the country, because we need to get this passed out of the Senate today and out of the House into the President as soon as possible. The American people are depending on us to respond responsibly in a bipartisan way during an emergency like this, and we cannot let them down.
Hey, good people. What's up? Hope you're having a good day so far. Wonderful Wednesday, hump day, whatever you want to call it. Wacky Wednesday, if you like Hungry Howies. So, yeah, I guess they're just waiting on the next liar to come through or something. Yep. Hope. They get this crap over with today. Would be nice. Yeah, hang on just a second, folks. I'm going to talk to my sister, so let me play a song real quick for you. Hang on, Crystal. I don't have any music in this computer yet, so. Come on, load up. Yeah, I hear you, kitty. Kitty.
You got me tripping, I'm something, I'm ready for a fucking medical bam. Visual proof, some changes, some scopes, and said it again. Around the truth in your memories, doing suspicious as fuck, they all sad. Since I can switch up your shows, back in your nose, and then you feel it as it's always been. I know I'm learning all of how to play. Since switch the errands here, he broke the pace. You were so restless, it's all in your face. But I can't help this enough from the change. My name is endless, I can't win the race. Come to my mind, let's keep up with the pace. Always affected, I'm trapped in this cage. Always expected, it's just me believe. You got me tripping, I'm slipping, I'm ready for a fucking medical ban. Everything's changing, a new renovation is someone invading again. See, trading places, our demons and sightings, our language keeps changing, but when? Did they start saying, pretty quit singing, all the rolling thing. So they yourself when you see it like me, they stash at that dash and that monocle thing. Made up of gold, like some big. Oh, you don't know, just so the change. Maybe she's making my suspicion thing. She's just a rag, as she's just a rag. In this red cave, what he believes. Throw on the tape, bring us the scene. Where Cupid is the one who's up to the scene. That's what I brought on. I'm screen, a car in a showroom. The chances of Paris, let's sing a scene. Just to succeed, here has the team. All the girls love, what's your name? This very true. I'm not afraid, the justice of Paris. Let's sing a scene. Just to succeed, here and here, there's their team. All the girls love, what's your name? This very true. I'm not afraid, everywhere that I go now, there's always a fucking upside down, man, like a rail, tell you alive, oh, what's your name, my own TV.
Songwriter and gig worker, they've all been telling me they are running out of time.
Whoops, my bad.
And they have just
They're
really
back.
been very
Another liar.
for what was going to come about out of this chamber. And I know that in the days and weeks ahead, as we work through getting relief to communities and individuals and small business owners and large companies, that there's going to be a lot of blame that is going to be thrown around. There are going to be some that are going to blame politicians. There are others that are going to blame the way the economy is structured. There are others still who are going to blame the healthcare system. But I will tell you, I think that there is a necessity to have a discussion about why we do have this current crisis. And it is because of the leadership of the Chinese government, the People's Republic of China, that leadership in Beijing. And we have gone round and round with activists and media on the point, and I shouldn't have to point out that when we say that China is to blame for the spread of the novel coronavirus that we call COVID-19. We do not mean the Chinese people as a whole, but yet we have some that do not want to say, this is where it came from. I think we should stop that, and we should move forward with decisions based on fact, with decisions that are based on data. And we need to begin to collect those facts and to collect that data as it pertains to this disease. This is how we get to the antivirals. It's how we get to having a vaccine. And it's how we look at lessons learned so that we don't go back through this again, so that we plan to tackle some of the unexpected occurrences that will come our way. And as we talk about facts, we do know that COVID-19 originated in Wuhan, China. From there, it spread rapidly, and it has had devastating consequences. The economy is crumbling. We're working desperately to shore it up. Innocent people have been in the hospital or sick. I talked to one Tennessean this morning who said, I'm happy to report my husband is coming back around. He has been suffering for the last many days with COVID-19. We've got the world's healthcare professionals, and what are they doing? They are working to the point of exhaustion. And what you have is Beijing's reckless communist dogma, and they're trying to blame everybody else. And today we are going to move forward with the rescue package. This is the phase 3 package. It is the 4th tranche of money. I'm including in that the president's emergency declaration, which put about $50 billion toward fighting this. And as we do this, and as we say, what is our way forward on addressing this? What we have to do is realize that our relationship with China is going to need to change, and change for the better. There is no denying that the way they have conducted themselves has put that relationship on dangerous ground. And today I invite my colleagues to support the bicameral Senate Resolution 553 and acknowledged that Beijing intentionally spread misinformation to downplay the severity of COVID-19 and baselessly denied the risk of person-to-person transmission of the disease. They refused to cooperate with international health authorities, including the CDC. During the early days of the outbreak, they censored doctors and journalists. We all remember what happened with the late Dr. Lee when he tried to give us the warnings, and on top of everything else, they maliciously ignored the health and safety of ethnic minorities. Mr. President, this is the easy part. The facts are there. All we have to do is acknowledge the facts that are there and use this as a beginning, because this resolution is, as I said, it's bicameral, it is bipartisan in the House, and we have no reason not to push it forward and send the message that we realize what happened to cause a global pandemic. And after we acknowledge Beijing's gross malfeasance, we're going to adjust the way we think about China in the context of the economy, of our national defense, technology, human rights, and pharmaceutical manufacturing. When you think about it, the fact that Beijing intentionally downplayed the deadly nature of COVID-19 should come as no surprise. For decades, China has made a business. It has been their business to search out our vulnerabilities, exploit those vulnerabilities. And then what do they try to do? They try to use that as leverage against us. So it is time for us to say no more. Now, here is another component, and I've talked about this week on the floor, our pharmaceutical supply chain. On February 27th, 2020, this year, the FDA announced the shortage of a drug used to treat victims of COVID-19. Imagine that. There was a drug shortage. They attributed the shortage to difficulties obtaining the active ingredient in this pharmaceutical. The active ingredient, they are called APIs. Now, they couldn't get it from this site in China, which was the site that manufactured it, because that site had been affected by COVID-19. So here we are. We need this component to go into a pharmaceutical. We cannot get it because the factory that produces this has been affected by COVID-19. And it's not the first time that this has happened. In 2016, we saw a shortage of an important antibiotic when the sole source of its production, the only place on the globe that produced this antibiotic, was in China. And that factory was shut down. Couldn't get it. Our vulnerability is not limited to one drug or even just a handful of drugs. In 2007 and 8, 246 people died after taking a contaminated blood thinner that came directly from a factory in China. They died, 246 people, just like that. Routine inspections didn't catch the contaminant, and the drugs flowed right into our medicine cabinets. 2010, regulators have also found serious problems with batches of thyroid medication, muscle relaxers, antibiotics. And this week I got an email from a Tennessean. He said, I saw what you said on the floor, and I want to let you know I take a heart medication, and it was just recalled because it contained a carcinogen, and it was made in China. Think about this. These are the pharmaceuticals we take to return ourselves to health and wellness, to manage chronic conditions. And here we have example after example of things that are contaminated, are not what they're intended to be. These are basic, common medications. In 2018, the FDA recalled several blood pressure medications made in China that were contaminated with cancer-causing toxins. Now, I would imagine there are a few people that come to work every day in this building that take a blood pressure medication. What if you had been taking one for a period of time and it contained the cancer-causing toxins? Americans deserve better than this from their pharmaceutical supply chain. If we allow this to continue, we are going to do so at our own peril. I encourage my colleagues to support the bipartisan Securing America's Medicine Cabinet, or SAMC Act. Senator Menendez has worked on this legislation with me, and I'm grateful to him for his support. Mr. President, you are working on legislation that would address some of these issues. Bring this pharmaceutical manufacturing back into the United States of America. We need to end Chinese control over our health and wellness in this pharmaceutical supply chain. This may seem like something that is too large or too risky an undertaking, but we have already paid dearly for our reliance on Chinese drug manufacturers, and it's not going to stop, because that vulnerability is leverage in the hands of madmen in Beijing who seek nothing but power and will go to any lengths to acquire that power. They don't care who they hurt. It's clear with this global pandemic. They don't care if it is innocent people that are sick or maybe even that lose their life. And they defy us. They defy us when we try to stop them. It's time that we rise to the challenge and that we return the supply chain. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And I'm sure the next liar will be up to the podium momentarily, folks. Yuck, yuck, yuck.
Mr. President,
Uh-oh.
Senator from Indiana.
are we in a quorum call?
Yes,
Could we lift the quorum call?
without objection.
Mr. President, I've been here a little over a year. I keep mentioning that often because what a year it's been. In that stretch, there's not been a period of time where I think there's been so much urgency for us as a Senate, for the other chamber to do their job, to deliver for the American people. We're in the midst of a crisis that in building a business over 37, 38 years, you've constantly got hurdles to jump. You never really know the clear outcome. You try to have a great strategy with good implementation, good tactics that would be your salvation through thick or thin. When it comes to the coronavirus, it's not like we haven't had other recent issues, but nothing quite like this. To where it started in another country, it's gone across the world, and it now looks like that vector into our country, we may be dealing with it on the broadest scale. I'm a guy that believes in free enterprise. I don't like it when government has to step in, but I don't know what we would have done otherwise in this case. Until we tamp the disease down, until we get that curve flattened, no one is going to be at ease. We've invested 3-4 weeks of actual guidelines. We knew it was coming way before that. I'm hopeful that we've been doing a lot of the right things even before we were required to do them. So we can't relent on that course. On the other hand, never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined an economy could be affected like it has. Get stories from my home state of Indiana all the time. And not only from the places like hotels, restaurants, bars, airlines. I think our senior senator actually either went home or came out here, might have been the only person on the plane. That's a graphic example of how this is impacting commerce. The hotel owner I talked to, 2% occupancy in the week before. So we've come together. This past weekend, we worked through it. I think that's the first time since I've been here that on a legislative matter, we've done that. Had Democrats and Republicans at the grassroots level working to deliver what I think is a good package. It focuses on, number one, who needs it the most, workers that have been displaced and small business owners. It also has got stuff in for the broader part of the economy. Urgency is the key. We're working through right now some short-term corrections, and I hope that doesn't thwart the process. We should have had this across the finish line Sunday evening to where it could have been delivered on Monday morning, and we wouldn't still have the nation on high alert about what we're going to do here and it can only come from here in this case. I'm going to segue into, we need to get that done today, and I'm going to be for it. Each state, each senator, each representative is going to have to deliver to the small business owners, the individuals that have been displaced by this. And I've got a team back in Indiana that has taken on just a big spectrum of casework. And I invite you, when this legislation gets across the finish line, to make sure you reach out to our office. Many of our cases, regrettably, have been along the lines of helping folks interface with the VA. Sadly, I wish there were fewer of them, but we've had really good luck. We interfaced when a cruise ship had Hoosiers stranded, and we're able to follow up on the process to make sure they came back. Currently dealing with cases where you're stranded overseas. Whatever it is, come to our Senate office. We've got a great team, and they've helped a lot of Hoosiers out already. I want to end on a positive note. I think this has got the country down because everything you see is in the context of negativity. I like the fact that aspirationally, many are already talking about what we're going to do when we come out of it. And through prayers and through all the stuff Americans, Hoosiers have done, I think we're going to see that curve start to flatten. And I like the approach we've taken to put the emphasis on the disease, because until those numbers go down, no one is going to be at ease. So as we look to the future, Monday was that first threshold, 15 days. We need to reassess, take all the information we've gained and gathered, and make the right decisions going forward. I trust our governors and our local governments across the country to do the same thing. And we will come out ahead. We are going to flatten the curve and make sure that we're taking care of the most important thing first. And I think that's going to be here hopefully sooner rather than later. And then we also need to be aspirational about what is going to really get this country back to business as usual. And that's when we can have Main Street going back the way it was a month or two ago, when we can recapture the best economy that we've probably ever had in history. And I know Hoosiers will do their job. They will be aspirational, and Americans across the country will do the same. I yield the floor. I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Okay, should be getting close to a vote now. They've said all the lies they want to say. They've shared all the propaganda they have, lined up for you. And now it's time to see what happens. Hopefully they vote and get it through, and we get the little bit of money that they want to give us.
Mr. President.
Senator from Georgia.
Oh, we got another senator, another S-I-N, senator.
Mr. President, we're on the cusp of a historic bill today, bipartisan bill, that we took a different approach thanks to Republican leadership, where we put the leaders of each of the committees, both Democrat and Republicans, to focus on their portion of the needs behind this COVID-19 crisis. Before I get into my remarks today, though, I want to remind the colleagues here today that we have sponsored a resolution recognizing and thanking all the people in America who are stepping up and, as others said, put their own health and their family's health at risk to make sure that their neighbors and friends and patients and business partners are taken care of. I'm talking about supply chain people, healthcare workers, transportation workers, all the people in the country, ag industry, all the people in the country who are keeping the essential needs of our population going. While restaurants are closed, they have takeout services, even here in Washington, D.C. That is not an easy thing to do for those folks. It's a lost leader. They're losing money on it. And I wanted to make sure that we recognize in the midst of this crisis how Americans are responding. Americans always respond to crisis in a better way than anybody else in the history of the world, in my opinion. Sometimes we're not always the quickest to recognize that we're in a crisis, but right now we are responding to this one right here before us. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, I believe we have two crises today. One is obviously the medical crisis, the healthcare crisis that we now are characterizing as COVID-19 virus. We know how it originated, and we know now what other countries are learning from that who are ahead of us in the cycle. But because of that, we have a connecting economic crisis that we're trying to deal with in this piece of legislation today. I hope we can get this done tonight. I don't see any reason why we can't. We have a deal. There are some questions here in the last hour, but I think we'll get those done and hopefully get this voted on and signed, or get this voted on tonight. As we deal with these two crises, Mr. President, it's my suggestion that we look at this, how we address dealing with this crisis in three phases. One, we're in the middle of the first phase right now, and I would characterize it as mobilization, where we're identifying the severity of the disease, we're identifying who is the most vulnerable, we're identifying what we need to do to deal with it, and we're mobilizing behind that. We see a dramatic increase in the number of tests, thanks to Vice President Pence. We still have shortages of testing kits and swabs and reagents and even testing machines, but we have things like in my state where one of our major hospitals, Emory University Hospital, has their own testing. They can do it in a matter of hours versus days, and they're making that available to other hospitals in the state. This is all hands on deck. And they'll probably lose money doing that, Mr. President, but they're willing to do that. We have an apparel company in Georgia who has now shut down their business in apparel, and they have good orders, profitable orders. They're putting those aside to make masks to try to help fill the need there in those shortages. But the mobilization phase is where we are today. We're identifying, based on the experiences of other countries, what we might expect here. We have hotspots in our country, just like other countries have had. We saw what happened in Wuhan and Hubei province in China. I've been there. It's a very old population, older population. They were late getting to the identification and treatment and isolation, and we see the repercussions of that. But what we can learn from is that they are ahead of us in the cycle. However they dealt with that in the early days, we see now how they have dealt with that crisis and what's happening to the numbers, and we can learn from that. And I'll talk about that in a second. The second phase, though, is transition, and this is one I'm not sure we're in it yet, but we're about to go into it, partly because of this package, and that is to make sure that we protect the parts of the economy where we can, so that when we do start to come out of this, just like every other country ahead of us in the cycle has done and is doing right now, that we'll have our businesses in a position to reconnect with the employers or employees that they've worked so hard to develop. And of course, the third phase is full-on recovery, and that is to do the things then to get the economy back on its strong footing, to make sure then we address the shortages of what we found in our current preparation for this. For example, we didn't have a strategic stockpile of some of these essential medical essentials that we needed in the identification, testing, and treatment of this particular virus. That recovery will take some time, but at the same time, the way America always responds to this is that I believe we can respond very quickly if we get the transition phase correct, and that's what I want to talk about today. As we look at the medical crisis, though, we understand now through a lot of data outside of the U.S., and I will caveat this, that each country's experience is just a little bit different. I would also comment that there's a lot of noise in the data that I see around the world right now. The medical community is doing a great job of trying to aggregate this data to see how it applies to our needs here at home. I give our doctors and nurses and caregivers the highest thank you I can for what they're doing here and all over the world for that matter. But what the experience is in Italy might not be the same as it is here. The experience in South Korea might not be the same as it is here. So we have to look at those and be very careful that we don't try to extrapolate either the severity or the lack of severity as being applicable here. This particular, what we do know though, before I get to the bill, is that in the World Health Organization just this week has published an update to their numbers, and they're characterizing this disease this way. And look, every country has a little bit different infection rate, a little different mortality rate. I believe the United States, because we haven't tested as broadly as some of the other countries like South Korea have done, we don't know what the denominator is yet. So we really don't know what the mortality rate is or the infection rate for that matter. But this is what the World Health Organization is doing. Just to put this in perspective, that about 80% of the people infected with this COVID-19 virus will probably have a mild, that's the way they characterize it, a mild experience with this disease. 15% will be serious enough to go to a hospital particularly, and then of that 5% will be critical patients, typically generally toward the more vulnerable patients, elderly, people with respiratory existing diseases, and or potentially immune deficiencies. As we deal with that medical crisis, and we've poured a lot of resources toward that in the first two phases of help, and in addition to what the president did with his $50 billion allocation earlier. This bill, almost $2 trillion of aid as we see it toward businesses and communities and states to make sure that we can weather this storm. This bill, let's be very clear about this. This is not about companies. This is about employees. This is about the people who work for employers, either in their own business or in somebody else's business. This is all about employees. It is merely a financial bridge to get through this period of time to get into that recovery phase that I'm trying to describe here a little earlier. It's about the employer-employee relationship and to make sure that we keep that relationship intact. Look, in the last 3 years, we created 7.5 million new jobs. Prior to this crisis, this virus crisis, we had an economy that was just booming, created 7.5 million new jobs. We had 7.5 million job openings, as a matter of fact, and only 5 million people looking for work. So we had a situation where we had the economy moving in the right direction, and then this hits, and we want to make sure we don't lose any of those jobs. And for that reason, we focused on the employer-employee relationship. Yes, we plussed up unemployment benefits for the state so that they're not overwhelmed, but we made sure that the employer had the liquidity to keep these people employed. And in that vein, we did not want to have a liquidity crisis, which we could very well have right now because of shutting these businesses down. We didn't want that liquidity crisis to turn into an insolvency crisis. We can deal with a liquidity issue. It's very difficult to come back and deal with companies that have gone insolvent and are now in bankruptcy proceedings. That is a very long and difficult process. It's difficult to come back from. We do not want to do that, and that was the primary purpose of most of the facets of this bill, some $2 trillion. I'll say this about that. There are two major components to do that. One is a small business continues. Now, a little over 50% of the people who work in America work for companies that have 500 employees or fewer.
Ooh, the bucket
That's a
ball
new
got
learning for
me.
me. That's changed dramatically. But it is the engine. This is not new news. This is the engine of new job growth. We know that in the last 3 years. Well, we have $350 billion directly targeted toward those small businesses who can then, by the way, go to their existing local banker and get this facility done, a government-backed loan guarantee. In addition to that, there's $454 billion directed at other businesses, plus another $58 billion towards strategically important industries like our airline industry and so forth. And again, most of this money is in the form of loan guarantees to provide liquidity to keep the employee employed with their employer. It's no more difficult than that. But one other thing that's not being talked about, and I want to highlight this, and that is $454 billion is historic. That's a lot of money. But it has the ability through the Treasury that they can actually lever that up in terms of the way that the money goes out to banks. It can be levered up to $3 or $4 trillion. So what we're talking about here is the potential of up to $5 trillion of liquidity into our economy. This is historic. It should be enough to shock the system to see, okay, there's going to be liquidity there. There may be some growing pains in the early days, but the liquidity is going to be there to weather this storm, to bridge this crisis. I want to look at what's next. Talk about this transition phase and maybe even the recovery phase for a second. The first thing we have to do is we have to really learn from other countries that they're ahead of us in the cycle. For example, it took about 6 to 8 weeks for China, even with their mistakes, it took about 6 to 8 weeks to go from 0 to their maximum number. But we know that the disease has a life cycle. If somebody is infected with it, if they survive, they come on the backside. And so far, there's over 70,000 people that have had the disease in China and are healthy now. We know from anecdotal evidence on the ground that about 80% of the employed workers in China are beginning to go back to work, and almost 90% of factories. This is outside of Hubei province, outside of Wuhan and Hubei province. They're going back to work. In South Korea, the learning there is testing, testing, testing. But more than that, they also track contacts. Now, there are 50 million people in South Korea. We have 330 million. It's a little different here, but in certain cities and states, they can certainly look at doing that. So we have to learn from countries like South Korea and Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, and even China, because they're ahead of us in this cycle. We should be in the first few weeks of this cycle going from 0 to whatever our maximum number is, but it's the number of active cases that's the most important, not the number of total cases. So the mortality rate is yet to be determined because we don't really know the denominator. But I believe if we can test more, and the acceleration curve, according to Vice President Pence, is underway right now, that we will have that ability to do. Contact tracking is another, and then isolation is another one we have to think about, unfortunately. We have hotspots. In the Ebola crisis in Africa, what we learned from the medical community was if they could put a full court press on the areas of flaring where we had the disease flare up and isolate it where they didn't have people traveling outside of those areas. So isolation by geography and demography are unfortunately called for if we're going to do everything we have to do to control this disease in the time frame that we should. The third thing I'll highlight briefly is I believe right now this shows that we were behind in terms of our preparation for a pandemic like this. There's no question about it in the country and the world. We can point fingers and blame. That's not my purpose today. What I want to talk about is this. In America, and if we can bring the world's resources with data, this is the big thing. We have limited data in the United States. There are other countries that have a lot of data. I believe if we aggregate that data and create a Manhattan Project type effort to go toward vaccines and treatments, that we can absolutely be ready for flu season next year, if in fact this particular COVID-19 virus has a seasonality. We don't know that yet. In conclusion, Mr. President, there is no question that this is a moment of challenge in America. I will say this, that President Trump, for all his detractors, early on stepped up and was a strong leader. I said this several years ago. He reminded me of Winston Churchill, irascible but effective in getting results. And that's what we've had early on. Right now, we need a steady hand to make sure we don't kill the economy while we kill this disease. And my only point is in this transition period, and nobody has all the answers yet, we need to start asking the questions of what can we do in this transition period to find a balance between protecting life and protecting the economy long term, so that when people get well, they'll have a job to go back to, and we'll have an economy that can help the world prepare for the next pandemic that we're talking about here. The American people have the best spirit, I believe, in the history of the world when it comes to dealing with this crisis. I've talked about a couple examples in my state. The airlines right now are another one. I know that Delta is one of the primary airline carriers we have in the country. They're keeping some flights on. I know I have a reservation on a commercial flight later this week, and I asked my assistant, you sure I can get a seat on that plane? She said, yeah, there are only 5 people who have booked a seat on that plane. So it shows that people are trying to do their part here. Neighbors, people going to grocery stores for their neighbors, taking care of picking up mail, doing anything they can to protect the people that are at risk. In small communities, we know how to do that. In major cities, it's more difficult, but it's even possible there. I'll conclude with this, Mr. President. There is a day coming, and it's not that far off, that we'll be behind the top end of this curve in America. We will have lost some lives. That's unfortunate. We all regret that. But what we have to do now is to make sure we prepare ourselves for this transition phase, that while we're coming and still dealing with people who are getting the disease is on the wane, and the economy needs to be brought back so that we can make sure that we can prepare this country for the next round that we may or may not see in the future. With that, I yield the floor.
I received a call a few hours ago from someone I've known for a long time, and a gentleman in his, I would say, early to mid-90s. And he wanted me to stop saying that what we're facing is an unprecedented challenge. And I was taken aback. I mean, none of us have ever lived through anything like this or confronted a situation this painful or so dramatic. And so he challenged me to do something that I'd actually done a few years ago, but as it shows, even a few years erodes memory. about things that happened long in the past. He challenged me to say, everybody's comparing this to the last time we had something like this. It required the nation to react like we did in World War II. And so it caused me to go back and look a little bit at the years before that great and bloody conflict. It's interesting, in the years leading up to 1941, President Roosevelt had an effort to pack the Supreme Court. And it was incredibly controversial. It ended up falling apart in 1937. It ended up falling apart, actually, because members of his own party turned against him. And it actually weakened him in what would that tail end of his second deal. President Roosevelt was so upset about what members of his own party had done to him that in 1938, he did something unprecedented at the time. He got involved in Democratic primaries and tried to take out members of his own party who had opposed him. Not only did he lose badly in that effort, I think he only won one of those seats that he went after. As a result of what he did, his party lost 6 seats in the Senate, 71 in the House, and ultimately, in this very chamber, a Republican, Robert Taft, was able to put together a coalition with conservative Democrats and basically block President Roosevelt's agenda leading into 1940. Then in 1940, Roosevelt did something else that was unprecedented and highly controversial. He announced, although it was legal, that he was running for a third term. He was at that point defying a long precedent that had been set by the nation's first president. And then to make matters even more interesting, his own vice president, who had turned on him on the court issue, he had to kick him off the ballot. In fact, he told them, if you nominate him as vice president, I will refuse the nomination. And ultimately, he was reelected on a promise, ultimately reelected by a pretty big margin, but he had to make a promise: I will keep this country out of war. This sets the stage going into November, December 1940. A president that had spent the last 3 years battling his own party, had seen his own agenda slowed and stifled, and then had to kick off his own vice president after getting involved in primaries against his own party. He loses a large number of seats in the House and in the Senate, has a coalition form against him to block him, and then has to make a promise: we're not going to war. All the while, understanding that what was happening in Europe would eventually reach us, and he was preparing for war. And why he made that promise was pretty fundamental. Going to war was not popular in this country. Millions of Americans, particularly those at the time you couldn't really travel abroad, had no connections to Europe. They looked at World War I as a European war, and they looked at the Second World War as just another trick to get America sucked back into a war that had to do with Europeans and not with them. Prominent voices, chief among them, Charles Lindbergh, traveled the country, blasting the president as a warmonger in the strongest possible terms. There was actually a student anti-war movement. Now, not as many people went to college at that time as did in the 60s, but it was really a precursor to that very movement. Why? Because these young people in college were the ones that were going to be sent to war if there was one, and they wanted no part of it. And then, in the blink of an eye, at 7:48 a.m. on the 7th of December, 1941, the Japanese attacked a U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. They sunk 4 of our battleships. We lost almost 200 airplanes, and 2,300 Americans perished on that very day. Even to the end of the war, it remained the 3rd bloodiest day of that very bloody conflict. America was not ready for war. They had started a draft by a 1-vote margin. They were able to vote it into place. They had begun some basic rearmament, but we had lost a significant percentage of our Pacific fleet. And frankly, to this day, there are legitimate questions, not about whether the Roosevelt administration knew in advance that this was happening and allowed the attack to happen. No, those are conspiracy theories that they should have known. This was a massive intelligence failure. In fact, up to 30 minutes before that attack, the ambassador to Japan was here negotiating with the United States over an oil embargo. And America, by the way, was not a society at peace. This was a nation deeply divided, a segregated nation that discriminated against citizens of color. There were very serious labor disputes going on throughout the country. Many still wore the scars of a deep and painful economic depression. And yet, in the blink of an eye, this nation was confronted with an enemy and had no choice but to put aside all that had happened to that point. Everything, all the problems they had with the president, all the problems they had with each other, even those Americans that had been discriminated against, were willing to do that. Tremendous testament to the contribution they made to the effort to win that conflict. And in the blink of an eye, literally every aspect of American life was changed overnight. Think about it. 1 minute you are a student demanding that we stay out of war, and the next you are volunteering for service. 1 minute you're a housewife, you're a retiree. The next minute you're back at work, or at work for the first time in your life at a factory, making munitions or something else needed for the war effort. School kids, children, were put to work in farms because so many people had left farming to move and fill the industrial jobs, because the men that would have otherwise fulfilled those jobs were now wearing a uniform and dying by the hundreds every day, and then by the thousands all over the world. We rationed food. There was food rationing. You could only eat so much. A family only got so much. Gasoline was rationed. I think it was 3 gallons a week, if I'm not mistaken. Clothes was rationed. You know, the government stepped in and said, you can't build kitchen appliances, no refrigerators, no ovens, no vacuum cleaners, none of it. We need all of our industrial capacity to fight and win a war. People on the coasts, and you still see old pictures of this to this day, off Miami Beach, off New York, people had to have these, turn your lights off at night and close the shades to your window because there were German U-boats just off our East Coast. People were asked to make tremendous sacrifices. Not for 3 months, not for 6 weeks, for over 3 years and longer. And sacrifices ultimately, perhaps the greatest of all, they sent their sons and fathers off to die in the defense of this country and of our freedoms. I do not mean to diminish the challenges that are being asked of us now. There isn't 5 minutes that goes by that I don't get a call, a text, or an email from a small business who just 2 weeks ago was having its best year ever, talking about hiring new people. And now they're bankrupt. They're done. They're finished. And they may never reopen again. From a young couple I talked about earlier today in a video that I made, 2 weeks ago, recently married, planning to start a family, both had good careers. The next minute, both out of a job, not sure if the place they work in will ever exist again, not knowing where to go. 1 minute, you're the father in a family or the mother in a family who has never had a day in your life where you were not employed by someone. And the next, you're being told, go to a website or call this number, you need to go get unemployment. They don't know how to do it. They've never done it. So I do not mean to diminish the sacrifices that our people are already making. I simply mean to put it in perspective and also to give a little bit of clarity as to what will be required of us to win this war. Because in the end, our enemy is not a nation state. It doesn't wear a uniform. But it has invaded our nation in a way that's required us to do things we have not been asked to do or anything close to it since late 1941. So what are the lessons to be taken by that era in our history? By the call I got today saying, stop saying this is unprecedented. The lesson to be taken is, number one, in moments like this, government action matters. It is important that we have a functioning government that can address problems in the space in which government must act. That is what is being asked of us here today. What is being asked of us is not to pass a perfect bill or to pass legislation that will cure the virus or to pass a law that has everything we've ever wanted. What's being asked of us is, can you function as a government? Can you do the most basic things that a society needs from its elected leaders at a moment of true crisis? Can you do that? And so far, for 3 days, the answer, sadly, has been no. I hope the answer at the end of this day will be different. But the second thing it teaches us is, you cannot confront a challenge such as this with just government. That war was not just won because of political leaders or our armed forces. It was a whole of society effort. Every day, Americans were being asked to do things they had never done before in places they had never been, not just to make sacrifices from what they couldn't have, but sacrifices in what they were asked to do affirmatively. That will require the same of us now. And I want to tell you, there are people already doing that as we speak. The examples are too long to mention. But all over this country, there are people that are doing extraordinary things, stepping up, doing more than they've ever done because they have to. They know they must. I have no doubt that if our government leaders do their job and are willing to do their part and provide people transparent, clear, truthful guidelines about what we face and what lies ahead and what is expected of them, they may not be happy and people may not be excited about it, but they will do it. I know they will do it. They are already doing it. The third lesson is the awesome power of our country when a diverse population of go-getters, the most creative people that have ever walked the earth, come together, put aside their differences to confront a threat they face in common. And again, that is not possible. You can't ask of that of a society. You can't ask people to put aside their differences, put aside the trivial, put aside the things they don't agree on, and focus on the one thing that threatens us all. You can't ask them to do that if you're not willing to do it yourself. And it appears, at least up till this moment, that we have failed to do it. I hope today is a difference in that regard. We shall see. But it takes me back to the point I made originally. What is our job in this? Well, let me say that we are asking, and I say we, those of us in government at every level, are asking of our people to do some very difficult things. We're asking high school seniors, including one that lives in my home, to be the first in I don't know how many generations that won't have a prom, won't have a senior trip, won't have a graduation. Now, I know all those things may seem trivial and pale in comparison to World War II. But for a 17-year-old, these are a rite of passage. And there are many high school seniors in this country that will not get that this year. We're going to ask small businesses, and have asked them already, you need to close your doors. You can't open, you can't work, you can't make money, you can't allow customers to come in. We've asked people not to go to work. In fact, we've told them not to leave their homes. Over half this country is on an order, don't leave your house unless you're going to the doctor, the pharmacy, the gas station, or the grocery store. We're asking nurses and doctors to confront a virus that can infect them and their families and kill them and their families, just like anybody else, to do so on double shifts, oftentimes without the gear and the equipment to protect them. We're asking truck drivers to drive all night, also vulnerable to the virus, also worried about all the other things all of us are worried about, drive all night. Because tomorrow, those shelves need to be stocked with all the things that people are buying because they're afraid it's going to run out. And how can we ask that of our society? If for 3.5 days, we can't even vote on a law. We can't even walk to the front of this place and lift our finger up or down and say yes or no. We can't even do that. Spending the taxpayers' money on behalf of the taxpayers in a moment of critical crisis. I don't mean to be negative because, frankly, I hope that today is a day we'll get this solved, but there are still other people that have to weigh in here. In the House, outside commentators, people still emailing and texting, can we change this? Can we change that? I just don't know how we can ask people to do all these things we need to ask them to do. And in return, tell them, by the way, we're going to take our sweet time to do our part. And our part's the easiest one. And you can just imagine, extrapolate what we're facing now and take it back to 1941. Imagine if back then people would have been saying, boy, this is a great chance. This is a good opportunity to get back at FDR. This is a great opportunity now. He's in war. Let's roll back the New Deal. Let's really stick it to him for what he did 6 years ago with that court thing. Or the reverse, if he would have said, boy, this is a good opportunity to use the war powers that a president has to steamroll my political opponents and put in place whatever I want and run them over. Or imagine if we were saying, we need to build a lot of ships, but I'm not going to vote to build it unless you're building it in my state. I don't want to go any deeper into that because I don't mean that to say that some of the issues that people raise around here are not legitimate issues. They are. But sometimes the legitimacy of the issue, the importance of the issue, has to be weighed on a scale against the gravity of the moment. And I would say to you, if we were dealing with permanent policy in a normal course of business, or even in a moment of a cyclical economic downturn, we'd have some weeks to make some of these decisions. We've already taken too long. People got laid off today. People will be laid off tonight and tomorrow and the day after, and for days to come, even if we pass this bill. Imagine if we don't. What we are facing is the toughest thing this generation's ever faced. There's no doubt about it. And perhaps with the exception of gentlemen and people like the gentleman that called me this morning, it'd be the toughest thing we ever face in our lives. World War II was worse. This virus is terrible. But it will not last as long or kill as many people as that war did. But it will kill far too many people and last far too long. But it will last longer and kill more if we don't take action now. And that requires everyone to finally wake up and realize this virus doesn't care who you voted for in the last election. It doesn't care what you write on Twitter or what snarky remarks you come up with in your commentator moment on cable news. It doesn't care about any of that stuff. It doesn't care who you plan to vote for in the next election. It will infect you. It will kill you. It will kill people you love. It will kill members of your family. It will disrupt your community and your economy. It doesn't care about any of this other stuff. And it really is important for us to realize, not just for this bill, but moving forward, that there's no such thing as an outcome here that's good for half of us and bad for the other half. There is no possible political victory here. None. There is no outcome here in which half of us are going to be able to go back and say, boy, we really looked good and we made those guys look really bad and people are going to reward us for it. They're not. I promise you that when someone has lost their job and doesn't know where they're going to go and are stuck in their home and their lives have been turned upside down and a member of their family is in intensive care and they wind up at a hospital that's been overwhelmed and they can't care for them, they are not going to be, the last thing on their mind is going to be partisan politics or pre-existing differences. If you don't believe it, we're about to find that out, unfortunately. There is no outcome here in which half of us is happy and the other half are upset. It's a cliche. We use it all the time. I can't think of a better example than this one. We are truly all in this together. The carnage, the damage that this will do to our country is extraordinary. It will know no geographic bounds, no political affiliation, no demographic differences. This is a virus that can infect the heir to the crown in Britain just as easily as a 92-year-old retiree in a Florida nursing home. And so I hope that the gravity of the moment finally sinks in and that we take the necessary actions quickly. And if there's something in this bill you just really don't like, I don't mean to diminish it. If we can fix it, we should. But at this point, I'm going to tell you that there is nothing wrong in this bill There's nothing in this bill that will damage our country more than our inability to act. No matter how bad some provision in this bill you think may be, and I say this to both sides, there is nothing in this bill that will damage us more than doing nothing will. By far, the most damaging thing that can happen is not any provision of this legislation. It is our inability to act and to send a message to the American people that their leaders can't function, that their government doesn't work, not just on a day-to-day basis, but in a moment of crisis. And so I hope that whatever differences may still exist at this moment, and I'm trying to be fair because I know a lot of people have finally seen the full text of it just in the last few hours. And if you've caught something that can be fixed, it should be fixed. But I plead, I don't know what other word to use, that we don't leave here tonight without having passed this bill. Because I honestly don't know how this nation and our people can afford one more day of this. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
We'll have the next liar right up for you next. Don't worry, another liar coming right on up. Man, what a joke. What a bunch of propaganda. Just deceit. And that was my senator here for the state of Florida, Marco Polo, NWO Mole, Rubio, Chumpio. I swear he had a mouthful of cocaine or something, man. His lips were just going off the chain there with them. Just, man, weird. He's a hybrid. He's a hybrid, and he was malfunctioning. I don't know, man. These people are so evil. So evil. They just, it's just oozing out of them. So disgusted by the people we have put in power above us. It's gross, man. I just got this little postcard in the mail today. It says, slow the spread. President Trump's coronavirus guidelines for America. And then it's got the coronavirus.gov. More information, please visit, blah, blah, you know. And on the back here, listen and follow the directions of your state and local authorities. Yes, you know, the famous 9 words. I'm here from the government. I'm here to help, or whatever the crap, you know, Ronald Reagan said. Yeah. If you feel sick, stay home. Do not go to work. If your children are sick, keep them at home. Contact your medical provider. If you're an older person or have serious underlying health conditions, stay at home and away from other people. And shoot yourself in the head. No, that's what they'd love you to do. Sorry. If someone in your household tests positive, shoot them in the head. I mean, keep the entire household at home. Yeah. Work or study from home when possible. Avoid social gatherings in groups of more than 10 people. Avoid eating or drinking at bars and restaurants. Use pickup or delivery options. Avoid discretionary travel, shopping trips, social visits, and trips to get marijuana. Pharmaceuticals. Do not visit nursing homes or retirement or long care facilities. Forget about the old people. We will kill them off for you. Don't worry. I mean, you know. Always practice good hygiene. Wash your hands. Wash your ass, especially touching any frequently used item or surface. Wash your dildo. Oh, whoops, excuse me. Sneeze or cough in a tissue or inside of your elbow or in somebody's face to help spread it. Not. Okay, disinfect your ass. Disinfect used items and services as much as possible. Yes, yes, yes. All that good garbage for you. Thanks, Trump. Woo! Oh, my goodness, folks. We are being bombarded by evil from bastards. It's sick. Very sick what we're dealing with. And I guess they're trying to find another senator, to come on and tell you some more lies. Oh boy. So, Steve JMO is about to go live. Most interesting times we are living in. I might end this if they stay like this right here and come back for the vote or something later, because I'd like to catch Steve JMO's live stream. You know that some of us call him Stu McLovin, but we definitely love our Steve JMO, Stu McLovin. He is a very good, smart, brave young man. So I'll put a link to his stream that's coming up here in a few minutes, and we'll probably all go over there if you want to. That is. Hang on, bear with me here. About to get that link for you and see how many people are over there, all that kind of good stuff. Here it is. 3 minutes and 40 some seconds left. Most interesting times we live in. 4 people waiting. And I'm gonna grab this link for y'all. Maybe I'll just stream it over here too while we're waiting on that to come back. Right, trying to get to the back here. There we go. All right, and there's the link to JMO live stream. All right, let's see here. We can just go ahead and go right on over there too. It's right here, so it'll start shortly. I'm gonna go ahead and say, hey, good peeps.
To either adapt or they will die out. And then you go on to say, and I quote, that humanity is now faced with this stark choice: evolve or die.
There's so much to say in so little time. This is a song for those left behind, an insider's view to what's going on. If Christians are raptured away and are gone, in case of emergency, take this CD and make many copies to give away free. But first get a Bible and start reading now. The moment will come when they will not allow distribution, possession of anything Christian. You'll go underground, a secret resistance, and face persecution, imprisoned and beaten. Now is the time to make your decision to battle his minions left on this earth, or fall for a false explanation, prefer to be herded like sheep. The ancient delusion, the oldest of schemes, has come to conclusion. A mark of the beast from the father of lies, the angel of light, master of disguise. He's devising a plan, preparing us now, and through evolution, convincing the crowds that aliens somehow are out there and bound to have all of the answers and power to know the solution. Like indigo children, smart smarter than humans, more intuition, much more evolved. They're sending a vision, prepare the whole world with a false explanation. If we're to evolve, we must remove Christians. They call it the cleansing, and this is their mission.
Evolve or die refers to whether humanity survives as a species. There is an enormous awakening happening on the planet.
The age of Aquarius, ending duality, Oprah the secret, and Eckhart Tolle preach what will bring in a new age reality based in traditions of pagan theosophy, bound to be thousands of offshoots of Crowley, students of Alice C. Bailey who follow the lies of Helena Blavatsky, radically altering, changing the pages of history, laying the groundwork forged by the tools of Lucifer, paving the way for the United Nations, a slow preparation, patiently waiting since the creation. The Garden of Eden, a planet whose placement in time is persuaded by aliens, outside invasions, abductions, and cow mutilations, creating an atmosphere ripe for the picking with movies and Hollywood, implanting trickery, mastery over the masses. The whole world collapses in panic, all desperate for someone to save them away. Anyone that will answer that question, the savior of sorts, a new age messiah. The wolf in sheep's clothing is what will transpire. The mayhem is out of control at this moment. A world full of chaos, confusion, and torment. I'm telling you, don't stop at anything. You can't afford to face life without Christ as your king. The moment might come when the storms of reality, trapped in a world where it's actually happening.
That's one of my favorite quotes that a significant portion of the Earth's population will soon recognize, if they haven't already done so, that humanity is now faced with a stark choice: evolve or die.
All right, what's going on, everyone? It's Steve JMO, and I got Bobby Stevens with us today. What's going on, Bobby?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. How you doing over there in Philly, right?
Yeah, it's getting pretty wild over here now. People are starting to get more scared by the minute.
Right, because you said that someone claimed there was a death from the corona today, and people are like freaking out.
Yeah, in Philly, my neighbors who haven't really talked about it are now talking about the coronavirus because the person in Philly apparently died. So yeah, people are starting to ramp up a little bit.
Yeah, that's all they need is one, either real death, and they just point the finger. It's coronavirus. Could have been some like 84-year-old dude just dying, or no one actually died, and they're just putting it out there. And either way, it's going to cause the same reaction. People freak out when they hear things like that. Like, oh, it's in my town. There's, the enemy, the death. It's in my town. Like, we need Donald Trump. We need this. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's getting crazy. Because I think, what was it, a couple of days ago, didn't Trump come out and say, like, people are going to start killing themselves if the quarantine continues to happen or something like that? And now today, the New York Post says that an Italian nurse killed herself because she was tested positive, and she fears she already has infected people, and she doesn't want to.
Oh, wow.
Almost glorifying it, like killing yourself to save others, if you will.
Jesus, man, that's one hell of a way to knock off part of the population, wouldn't you say? Like, hey, you're infected, might as well kill yourself. We don't have the vaccine yet, but it's coming. But you'll be dead before the vaccine comes. I could see that happening, especially a lot of people around here in my neck of the woods and like Western Mass and even Eastern Mass too, bro. They're so soft, man. They're so soft. Like, the people around here, like, they'll believe anything they see on TV, even if it's on like CNN and they're Trump people. They're like, oh, well, might have to follow that. I'm like, no, bro, like, just go outside and look for yourself. Nothing's actually happening. The only thing I've noticed is like, there's no people on the side of the roads anymore. There's just traffic, and that's even down. Like, say there was 10 cars on the road 2 weeks ago. Now there's like 7. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, same here. Coming home, because, I live in Philly, but I work probably an hour from home sometimes with my job. So coming home around this time, it would take an hour to get home. It took me 25 minutes to get home.
Jeez, that's a huge difference. So you
straight
might
down 95, straight shot.
Damn, that's interesting. And yeah, because I went all around Western Mass today. I started in my neighborhood, then I went out to Ware again to check out on that the National Guard stand, and it was still the same. Nothing new today, which is, I guess, is good for now. But I don't know, it's just strange. But I went all the way up Route 9 down to Route 202 and back around Springfield. And like I said, the only thing I noticed were, side of the road, there was no like bikers, or there's a couple people fishing. That's where the Quabbin Reservoir is. It's a giant freshwater reservoir. And other than that, it's pretty just like normal-ish, I guess. But I don't know, how are the clouds in your area today? Because I look up and it's just like just gray and for miles and miles and
Oh, it's horrendous. It's a blanket.
Yeah, I was gonna say. And honestly, it really reminded. I look up today. I'm like, what that color reminds me of that the water we were looking at last night with the holy water one specifically. How was that awful gray, and it wanted to be good, but it just couldn't. It just reminded me of that specifically. I was like, wow, man, it's interesting. But a lot of people have been saying it's been like good in their neighborhood. Like I saw Real Truth down here, South Carolina, I guess. A lot of people are experiencing like no clouds, no nothing. The UK, they got put on lockdown or whatever yesterday. Not lockdown, but like a light lockdown, I guess you could put it. You're only allowed to go outside once a day or something. It's ridiculous. But they said it rains, obviously it's gray all the time in the UK. I guess today, no clouds, straight sunshine. I find that interesting. I find that weird. It's like they're manipulating the weather so it's like better when you're inside. Like, oh, see, you guys are stopping using your cars. This is great. The weather's coming back to normal. That's what I feel.
I think the other day it was 70 here. Like I think maybe like last week. And then ever since like the virus, quote unquote, started really taking off, it's been 40 and raining.
Yeah. Same over here. It was like 65 like a week and a half ago, and then now it's like 30, 40. We had like 2 or 3 inches of shovelable snow the other day. It was that was on 322. So I'm like, here we go. Nothing like getting Steve wound up early in the morning. I look outside. I'm like, that's not good. I was like, every war movie I've seen, the troops move in when it's snowing. I just thought that was weird. Yeah. So I'm not the only one out here who thinks like that.
I mean, Richie from Boston said, on one of his videos, I think a couple of days ago, he said, watch the weather.
Yeah.
Watch the weather.
Yeah. And then I saw that and I'm like, oh, that's not cool. I was like, that's really not cool. It had me all bugged out and shit, but I don't know. It's just, it's imminent. What's going to happen is going to happen. Like I like to tell people, you could gear up, get the guns, get the bug out bags and, go in the woods and try to live out there. But everyone has touched a phone or a 4K capable, like a computer screen or your cell phone or laptop, the touchscreen laptops now. And that first of all, you get your fingerprint that way with the new iPhones and whatnot. Second of all, you hold it there long enough, it tamps into your heartbeat. Obviously, we're creations of God. We're individual. We all have individual heartbeats. Who's to say 5G can't be used as sonar above ground, which obviously it could be, seeing as it could, it can be used for a multiple array of things. And telecommunications is not one of them, which I find interesting.
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the chat. Rick said that he's in Philly and a ShopRite employee tested positive. So I went to that ShopRite is like 20 minutes from my house. And I went there and I talked to some people and they said, well, he doesn't really, his job, he didn't stock or anything. And he wasn't a cashier. I'm like, what the hell did he do? He's not stocking. He's not a cashier. He's not behind any counter of some sort. What did he do? Was he a cart, like taking the cars back and forth? I don't understand.
See, like the cart guy or something?
Yeah, like what did he do? Like why is this such breaking news in Philly? And he didn't work as a cashier. He didn't stock any shelves. So like, okay, what did he do?
Right. And that's kind of strange. Like you go to like any supermarket, like everyone does every other job at some point, except for like, working behind the deli thing. You got to have a certificate and whatnot for that in some places. But like you see someone, at the cashier spot, the next day I see them outside doing the carts, and the next day they're stocking. So everyone kind of does the same job on the interior aspect of a grocery store. So I find that really interesting. It's like, what did he really do? Then like, is there a deli in there or anything like that?
Well, yeah, they have, like where your produce is, where you can get your meats at and things like that. But like from all accounts I heard, really didn't do anything that was like a vital, like where people need to be worried about it, or at least, or they're lying and he did, and they're not trying to scare people or whatever. But everyone I talked to said he didn't do anything vital. So I'm like, okay, why is the news done? I'm just confused on why I'm talking about this guy.
Yeah, right. Why would that even be a thing if he doesn't do anything there that is like puts the public health at risk? That's just weird. That's interesting. But what did you send me? You sent me this last night. You sent me, well, not this exactly, but here, let me just do a full screen share. It's a lot easier that way. Yeah, you sent me tsunami last night, a tsunami alert.
Yeah.
That kind of had me alarmed, but it says it was canceled. So I find that interesting.
He canceled a tsunami?
Yeah, that's what I've gotten out of all the things I've read through here. Like, yeah, they were like, yep, it's gonna. There was no actual like earthquake, I guess, or something, but potentially destructive as of 3 hours ago. But over here it says canceled. I don't know what that means. It comes from the
14 hours ago, it said it was canceled, but then 3 hours ago, it says potentially destructive.
Right. And look at the pictures they have here. Can I zoom in? They have tornadoes. They got like cliffs ending. They have
I'm pretty sure
huge
the bottom
this.
two are from movies.
I think they all are. I think the top one here, this is literally from the movie Day After Tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's what I was saying about the bottom left one, that picture there. I think that is from like the same kind of movie, Day After Tomorrow type thing. Like, are these even real photos? Like, what am I looking at?
Well, Washington Post released it, so
that's credible stuff.
Yeah, take that with a grain of salt, maybe. That's ridiculous. I just thought that was strange. Oh, why can I not do anything right now? Am I frozen? Oh, that screen's frozen. That's interesting. Oh, it's because I'm zoomed in all the way. There we go. All right. Yeah. Fuck.
Yeah,
But yeah, that was just
pumping the fear out, man. They're like I would say, even though like I know like a lot of truthers they don't like reading mainstream news and stuff like that, and I look at it because, like I was saying last night, they kind of like show you their playbook a little bit, because the people who are asleep, they don't even see it. People who are awake, I can read a headline and go, oh, okay, they want to do this, this, and this. And like, so like now they're saying the first homeless person in New York dies from coronavirus. The army or whatever is building makeshift morgues outside of Bellevue Hospital in New York. Brian mirrored a live stream not too long ago.
Yeah. I was looking at this article from Washington or New York Post. I'm sorry. Yeah. Makeshift. What the fuck does that keep happening for, bro? Come on. Can I I can't even look at the headline here. All right. Makeshift morgue for coronavirus victims set up outside a hospital. And everyone knows what a morgue is. It's just, it's where they just stockpile bodies. And yeah, I just found that interesting. And what were you saying about Brian? He was what?
He mirrored a live stream. A guy, I forget the guy's channel's name. If Brian's in here, he can put it in the chat or join and tell us about it, because I watched it when I first got home. And so the guy lives in New York, so he went to Bellevue Hospital, and he was live streaming. There must have been 7 ambulances parked on the side of the road, and they're not doing anything. And he's asking about this makeshift morgue, and they're like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean? Are you joking? Are you for real?" No one knew about it. It wasn't where they said it was. He finally walked around and found it. And when it got there, it was Air Force first, not Army. It was special ops, and no one would answer his questions.
Wow. Okay, I think he sent me that, and I caught a couple minutes of that. He was talking to an EMT guy, but yeah. So keep continuing. What did I miss in that? I only caught like 3 or 4 minutes of it.
Oh, but so he was walking around, and he was asking people who were outside the hospital, EMTs, personnel, nurses, or it doesn't matter, if they heard about the mobile morgue, and either people ignored him or they didn't know what he was talking about. He found some firefighters that worked obviously for the city. He asked them like, "Hey, where's this mobile morgue?" And they were like, "Are you joking right now? That's not funny." He's like, "No, I'm being serious." Like the New York Post posted. He's like, "No, I don't know where that's at." He's like, "Well, do you think it's vital for EMT to know where, a mobile morgue is and stuff?" And they asked the guy, what you call it, the EMT. He's like, "Well, yeah, there's been a big spike in coronavirus. He's like, "Well, how many calls did you do last night?" He said 6,400.
So that's the part I did catch. Yeah.
Yeah, that part. Yeah. so like I think right before that part was when he showed like the line of ambulances, and there was like 3 EMTs per ambulance, and they're just kicked back, texting. They're asking if they seen anybody with coronavirus, and they kept saying, "Well, yeah, like." He's like, "Have you personally seen one?" He's like, "Well, we can't test them, so we can only assume." And it's just like, so no, basically, like that's a no. Like what? A line of ambulances, nobody in the back from ambulances driving around with no lights, no sirens. It was like I don't know if you've ever been around a movie set, but like when they say cut and everyone kind of just sits around for 15, 20 minutes waiting for their spot. That's what it looked like. It looked like people waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever happens. They're just sitting there.
Wow. That's interesting. That's like I've never been around a movie set, but I used to watch Entourage back in the day, so I could, I'm assuming something like that. Everyone's just chilling, waiting for the actor or the director to get his shit together, and that's interesting. No one knows no one, not even EMTs. They can't pinpoint. They know people, but they don't know them. They've heard of them.
Yeah, they assume.
Sounds kind of like 9/11, where everyone's like, "Yeah, I know my."
Alrighty then, that was Steve and the other guys. I forget his name, but anyway. So yeah, like they were saying though, it is all scripted. It's all like a movie set, and I have done a little bit of acting myself. I've been around that stuff. My stepfather works for Hollywood, unfortunately, and makes Hollywood movies here on here on the East Coast. Anyway, between North Carolina and New York, he's in the union. And yeah, got to go finish laundry later, y'all. All right, I appreciate you, Zilren, for coming in and hanging out. Thank you. I might end this soon if they don't do anything. Like I said, I'm keeping an eye on the Senate and the Senate hearings and the vote. I thought maybe they were fixing to do something, but you never know with these folks, these clowns. They're waiting to, I guess, for the next clown to come in and give his propaganda speech, or they're waiting for the vote to start, which the vote should be starting soon, but you never know. Like I said, we are coming up on 420 somewhere, so I'm going to go ahead and do a bucket bong. There's only 3 of y'all here, so hopefully I don't offend any of y'all by doing a bucket bong on the cam. Let me stop screen share. Hey, good people. Yes, I'm here. live. So yeah, it's really something to watch these folks in DC. Just put out one lie after another. They're only going to give us money if it benefits them, and they're all these crooked corporations that they represent. And that's who they represent, is the beast system, the corporations that are loyal to the beast system, not you and me, not the people, certainly not anybody that's out there in love with the truth and seeking it and spreading it like we do. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and like I said, I'm gonna play a song, and I'm gonna do a bucket bong for you guys. And then we'll see if they're gonna do the vote or bring out another lie or not. But thanks for being here, and I have a new laptop now, so I will be live probably every day or close to it. And I do overnight live streams too. So if you can't sleep, you can get up and watch my live stream overnight. Usually I have a co-host or two, and we get down and talk about everything from the virus to the corruption and evil that's going on out there. And they think that we are the virus, but they are the virus. See, the evil people out there trying to enslave us are the virus. And we just got to keep the full armor on and pay attention, and don't let them get us in any way, shape, form. Yep. All right. Well, here we go. I'm gonna get a song going, and then, like I said, I'm gonna medicate. I only do one one bucket bong, or if you will, fake gravity bong hit an hour. Sometimes two if I'm in a lot of pain. But lately here, I've gotten by with one hit an hour, and so I'm not trying to say everybody should be smoking weed all day long, getting ripped and out of their mind high or something. But I do promote the use of medical marijuana for sure. All right. Here we go. Let me find a song for you good people. And we will do that. Right. Bear with me, please.
Dress the party you want.
Just wanna.
That's a 23-month-old baby, a toddler, with her arm around her dad's neck, face down, tucked inside his shirt. They're both dead on the banks of the Rio Grande in Mexico. And they can see America.
I eat and breathe just like you. I even bleed just like you. I'm just like you. Got my own fam just like you. And I'll do anything I can for them just like you. I mean, I know we all want the same for our kids. A future that is better than the life that we live. Praying to a higher power, hoping someone would give. Not knowing if it even exists. Yeah, I'm just like you. But I didn't grow just like you. So I don't know just like you. I was never taught to read. How can I succeed just like you? I wish that I could dream just like you. I know it's crazy, but it's easy to see. You don't have to agree. When you dig in the roots, we all a part of the tree. The only difference in you and the person in me is I ain't from the land of the free. Just like you. Land of the free. Land of the free. Imagine anything I could be if I was only from the land of the free. Land of the free.
Madam President, are we in a forum call? Yes, I would ask.
Imagine anything I could be if I was only from the land of the free.
Thank you today, Madam
I hear a
President.
lot of y'all upset there.
Thank you for the
Saying we don't have a right to step there.
Today,
But if everything was fine, well, we all live. No, we wouldn't know we dying trying to get there. See, you hear the stories and what they say.
And today, the
You see
Senate
the photos and look
must
away.
act to pass the largest relief package for the American people in our history. First, I'd like to extend my thoughts and prayers to everyone who is personally affected by this coronavirus pandemic. I thank the healthcare workers who are working long hours and risking their own health to save lives. They are performing a national service. The numbers of infected individuals and the rapidly rising death toll are staggering. If we do not follow public health experts' advice, the totals could be truly horrifying.
Please don't
In
follow their
Mexico,
advice.
we have over 100 diagnosed cases, and today the first death in our state was reported. A senior citizen from Eddy County in the southeastern part of our state passed away on Sunday. All New Mexicans are facing new challenges, a threat to our health, a threat to our economy. My top priority is easing this hardship and making sure New Mexicans have what they need to stay healthy and to stay economically afloat. With that in mind, I'm rising today to tell New Mexicans relief is on the way. Relief to American workers who have been put out of work, and the small businesses that are making impossible decisions because of the coronavirus pandemic. Relief to our hospitals and frontline healthcare workers facing an overwhelmed healthcare system in the coming weeks and months. And relief to states and local governments that are doing their best to take care of their residents and maintain essential services. State and local governments are desperately in need of assistance. Only the federal government can provide. And tribal governments, to whom we owe trust and treaty obligations to provide health care, education, and community assistance, particularly in times of need. After days of furious negotiations, I'm pleased and relieved that Democrats and Republicans were able to reach agreement on what will be the largest federal relief effort in our history. The times demand a response of this magnitude. The stay-at-home orders, which make no mistake are necessary to stop the virus, threaten the livelihoods of millions of working families that live paycheck to paycheck. Millions of small businesses are in dire need of help. They power our economy, but simply can't survive during the kind of economic downturn we now face. The federal government has the power to make sure that people can take the public health measures that are necessary, while also staying afloat financially. We here in the Senate need to make absolutely sure that everyone, not just those at the top, that everyone is taken care of and can weather this crisis. I'm strongly supportive of the small business relief in this bill, which includes loans of up to $10 million that can be forgiven and turned into grants if employees are kept on the payroll. This relief will go through the Small Business Administration and be available to any business or nonprofit under 500 employees. With Democrats at the negotiating table, we worked toward that goal. And as a result, American workers will receive 4 months more of unemployment insurance instead of just 3. Because so many Americans are now out of work, we need an expanded unemployment insurance plan. This plan extends unemployment to the self-employed for the first time. It increases the maximum benefit by $600 per week. Many workers will receive their full pay under this expansion. Just to give an idea of the magnitude of this problem in my home state of New Mexico, during the week of March the 9th, we had fewer than 800 claims for unemployment. This last week, we had 11,000, and now we are receiving 7,000 every day. Also, because Democrats stood firm, our healthcare system will see an infusion of $55 billion more dollars into the Marshall Plan for healthcare. The total public health care investment in this bill is now $150 billion. We will establish a $150 billion relief fund for state, local, and tribal governments to help cover costs of fighting this virus. New Mexico is eligible for up to $1.25 billion from this fund. And we will bring accountability and transparency to the relief for industry and large corporations. This relief bill puts in transparency and independent oversight, and also makes sure that elected politicians, including the president, are not the beneficiaries of this fund. We face a national crisis of monumental proportions, and I'm heartened that Republicans and Democrats in this body joined together over the last several days to face this crisis together as a nation. This is what we do as Americans. And I have hope that as we continue to face down this crisis in the coming weeks and months, we will continue to do so in a united fashion. As Vice Chair of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee, I've been particularly focused on making sure that Indian country is not left out, and ensuring that tribes who are on the front lines of this public health and economic crisis have the resources they need and deserve. Together,
With my Democratic colleagues, I fought for and secured an $8 billion set aside for tribal governments and their enterprises. This tribal relief fund will provide the 574 federally recognized Indian tribes with flexible resources they need during the COVID-19 response. And I'm glad we found bipartisan agreement on this. We also secured over $2 billion in emergency funding for tribal needs. And this includes over $1 billion for the Indian Health Service that will be used for everything from expanding medical services to purchasing equipment, to promoting public health education, to expanding telehealth services and increasing disease surveillance. And over $700 million that will go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, and the HUD, Office of Native American Programs. These funds will assist tribal governments as they make their way through this crisis and support their members. Support BIE schools and tribal colleges and universities so that students continue with their education. And provide housing for those most in need who are impacted by this terrible virus. These are key victories, but we're not done. We must uphold our trust and treaty responsibilities to all American Indians and Alaska Natives. And so Congress must do more to respond to the unique COVID-19 related public health and economic crises in Indian country. Tribes are some of the most vulnerable populations with the least robust healthcare systems. We have a very scary outbreak on the Navajo Nation, and I'm sure that we need to weigh in and help there. For our next response package, and believe me, we're going to have to monitor this closely, and we're in all likelihood going to be back here again. We must make sure Indian country has equal access to federal coronavirus resources. Senator Heinrich and I fought hard for New Mexico priorities. We are working hard on issues that have to do with our national labs, one of our very, very top employers, in fact, probably the biggest. New Mexico's creative economy can't be left behind. Sitting as the lead Democrat on the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the national endowments, I pushed for an additional $75 million for both the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. These funds will support local artists and arts programs through this tough economic time when arts and cultural venues are shuttered and artists and all others are out of work. There is no doubt that these are exceedingly difficult times, but together we can get through this. I would like to remind everyone to follow the public health measures recommended by the experts. Staying at home is the best thing we can do to slow the spread of this virus and ensure our healthcare systems are not overrun. These measures are a firebreak that cuts off the fuel for this virus and prevents a catastrophe that overruns our hospitals. Social distance, wash your hands for 20 seconds. We all have an important part to play in containing COVID-19 and keeping ourselves and our neighbors and our communities safe. The state of New Mexico is under a stay-at-home order. I commend Governor Lujan Grisham for the quick and decisive action that she has taken, and she is focusing in on this like a laser beam. I know these measures are difficult and a hardship for many, but we will only be able to revive our economy once this public health crisis is abated. If we just let the virus run its course, we could lose over 1 million people. Some estimates are 2 million, 1 to 2 million. That would be totally unacceptable and devastating. And because of the frontline healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, and the technicians, and all those who support that work, hospital janitors, cafeteria workers, and so many others, this public health crisis will see an end. Thank you to everyone who is risking their own safety to help others, and thanks to all the Senate staff that is here on the floor and the people that work here. In the days and weeks and months ahead, we must continue to closely monitor all aspects of the impact of coronavirus on our nation's health and economy, and continue to decisively and aggressively respond to the needs of the American people. I am confident that, working together as one nation and one people, we will meet and beat this crisis and come out on the other end stronger. To conclude, we must pass this bill without delay. This is a good compromise, and we must act now. Madam President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
They're picking our bodies up every day. Just try and make it to the land of the free. We've been deprived of our peace. Ain't no food for a feast. Been no sleep since the gangs overran the police. They're raping all of our women, kidnapping kids in the street. They're shutting down all the schools, so there ain't no one to teach. They tell me I gotta join or I'll be dead in a week. There's nothing I can avoid, cause they gon' mark me as weak. I got a daughter that's 2, and I don't want her to see this side of life. I just wish she could be from the land of the free. Land of the free. Land of the free. Imagine everything she could be if she was only from the land of the free. Land of the free. Land of the free. Imagine everything she could be if she was only from the land of the free. Look, see, there's a little me in all of us. Can't imagine how scared my daughter was. 1,000 miles to the border was the distance. So for instance, we were walking from New Jersey to Florida. That's a long way, ain't it? Yeah, I know. Imagine not being able to use the roads, cause the second that you're spotted, your cover's forever blown. And that's the moment your whole family is gone. It's not a game, more than tired. Delusion is creeping into my brain. Carrying my kid cause she weak from the hunger pains. But we would have already been dead if we would have stayed. So I'd rather risk it all, try and make it another day. And I don't know what's in store, we gon' make it for sure. Even if I gotta swim us to shore by any means, I refuse to sit back and be a victim of war. I'll break my back to give my family more. You try and tell me if the place you called home wasn't safe anymore, and your country didn't have any law, with no future for your kids while y'all sat there starving and poor. You wouldn't die trying to make it across, just like me.
Both the father and daughter with dark hair. But these aren't just images. They were people. People with names and lives who are desperately searching for a better life.
Imagine everything that we'd be if we'd have made it to the land of the free.
Well, that song is deep right there. Woo-woo. Oh man. So while they're off trying to find another liar to share some propaganda with us, more propaganda. Just wanted to show y'all. Here's that postcard I got from the government today. President Trump's coronavirus guidelines for America. And I read it earlier, the whole thing, and made some jokes along with it too. But I don't know if y'all got one of these in the mail, but yep. Anyway, excuse me. Here. Man, I tell you, we are under attack. We have been for a number of years, but at least there are a lot of people, good people, that are waking up to the sound and of the missiles dropping, because they're dropping missiles on us left and right. They are putting in poison in everything that they can, from food to air to water to our minds. Thank goodness most of us don't go for their programming, regular TV programming, tell lies, vision. Now we're watching this thing here, but we're just keeping the enemy close, because we know that they tell the truth in their lies too. So I've already found some real interesting truths in their facts in their lies that they've told us here on the Senate floor today. And I think the biggest one is that they're here to help us. Because just like Ronald Reagan said, if they ever come saying they're from the government and here to help, that's the last thing on their mind. They want to keep us sick. They want to enslave us. They want to kill the resistance, which is probably most of us. And they want to move on. They want to kill off all the old people, because that's your witnesses, folks. Who do you go ask when you go talk to people about JFK and the Lindbergh baby and all these old Mandela effects that we talk about? You go ask the old people. You go ask the old people what the Bible used to say, before it's been changed supernaturally or whatever. I've had the same Bible. I show it all the time right here. I've had the same Bible since my dad bought it new in 1994 and gave it to me. So I've lost everything I own except for the clothes on my back a few times. Everything but this Bible and the clothes on my back, I should say. A few times. I've read this Bible many times before and after the scripture changes. But there you go. You can see the when he gave it to me, the date, September 19th, 1994. This is a King James version. It's a Schofield studied Bible, which has its own hate. There's people that hate that particular Bible with a passion because it talks about the rapture, about there being a rapture. It promotes the rapture. So there you go. A lot of people hate that particular version of the Bible for that reason. Oh dear. So I do believe the Book of Revelation is playing out right now, and I've said that many times. The Book of Revelation is what God saw man choosing to do in this time, in this age, right now. So even if, because a lot of people like to say if things would be different if they didn't have the Bible to use as a playbook, these evil people. But I dare to say, even if the Bible did not exist at all, the people would make the same changes, the same choices that would lead to the situation we're in today, and with the future situation of the beast system that's coming, the Antichrist and all that good stuff. So we're definitely just waiting on the fall of Lucifer
with the third of the angels, the fallen angels, and then the actual implementation of the complete beast system, which is the one world currency, one world government, one world religion, all that stuff. The official false prophet of the Book of Revelation, Pope Francis, is working hard to implement all these things to bring them about. He's been promoting all of these things for years now, and so you can't trust anybody in government. You can't trust anybody in religion that doesn't see the Bible scripture changes. I think there's a lot of pastors out there that do see the Bible scripture changes, but they're scared to tell their church congregation because they would just drop their Bibles and run for the doors and probably not go back to church if the pastor said, well, yeah, Satan is attacking the Bible, and changing it and making it all kinds of nasty, every kind of, all kind of ways, and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot going on that relates to the Book of Revelation, and the Book of Revelation bounces around. So you can't just read the Book of Revelation and find out exactly where we are, in this moment, because it does bounce around. It's not in order. So we're dealing with multiple chapters at one time, any given time with it. I still don't hear anything. So let's see. Yeah, they're just standing around and whatnot, chilling there on our money, taxpayer money, of course. Let me see if there's anything I wanted to share with you guys that I had saved. Hang on, just kind of bear with me here. Live stream show. Let's see. Okay, not there. Let's check the watch later list and see if I had anything saved there. I think I do. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Wednesday. I let my sister borrow my Cadillac the last couple days, and she brought it back today and brought me some groceries. Didn't ask for any money. It was like, wow, I guess I should go out there and see if there's any dents in my Cadillac. Oh boy. All right, so check this out, folks. What we have here is a new TED Talk that is labeled How We Must Respond to COVID-19 Pandemic by Bill Gates. It's a brand new. They just shared this yesterday, and it's 51 minutes and 51 seconds, which is 6:6. You know they did that on purpose. Wow. Freaking chumps. Okay, I don't think we're screen sharing, but we can remedy that real quick. And I'm gonna go ahead and we'll play a little bit of that. I'm not gonna play the whole thing, but we'll go ahead and look at that TED Talk. It's supposed to be new, so I don't know if anybody's seen it yet or not, but let's go ahead and play a little bit of that while we're waiting on the circus clowns to vote.
Have you ever noticed how some people just light up a room from the moment that they walk in? Now, if you've ever struggled with speaking up,
Thank you. I guess we have a pretty exciting guest to introduce. On the other side of the country, let's bring in Bill Gates. Bill, they say the better known people are, the less you have to intro them. So it's great to have you here. How are you doing?
Well, I think this is an unprecedented really disconcerting time for everyone, with things being shut down, not knowing exactly how long it's going to last, worrying about the health of all the people we care about. I'm lucky that I get to connect up with video conferencing using Teams a lot, so the foundation is stepping up, and there's a lot of great people trying to help with this crisis. But it's scary for everyone.
Are you basically stuck at home like many of us watching?
Yeah, almost all my meetings are using Teams now. I'm getting used to that. I've gone days without seeing any co-workers.
Let's start here, Bill. 5 years ago, you stood on the TED stage and you gave this chilling warning that the world was in danger at some point of a major pandemic. People watching that talk now, the hair stands up in the back of their neck. It is exactly what we're living through. What happened? Did people listen to that warning at all?
Basically, no. I was hopeful that with the Zika and Ebola and SARS and MERS, they all reminded us that particularly in a world where people move around so much, you can get huge devastation. And so the talk was to say, hey, we're not ready for the next pandemic, but in fact, there's advances in science that if we put resources against them, we can be ready. Sadly, very little was done. There were some things. The Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, was funded by our foundation, Wellcome Trust, and a number of governments to do some of the platform vaccine work. But in the area of diagnostics, antibodies, antivirals, basically doing the disease games that I talked about where we'd simulate what needed to be done, we hardly did anything. And so now here we have a respiratory virus that is sadly fulfilling some of the more negative predictions I made.
I mean, last month you said that this might be the big one. You wrote that this could be the sort of once in a century pandemic that people had been fearing. Is that how you think of it still?
Well, it's awful to say this, but we could have a respiratory virus whose case fatality rate was even higher. If this was something like smallpox, that kills 30% of people. So this is horrific. But in fact, most people, even who get the COVID disease, are able to survive. So in that, it's quite infectious, way more infectious than MERS or SARS were. It's not as fatal as they were. And yet the disruption we're seeing in order to knock it down is really completely unprecedented. So this is it's going global. It's respiratory. That was the great fear. How many people end up dying? Hopefully, if we do the right things, it won't be a gigantic number. So it's, we should end up not having a 1918 flu situation. We should be able to do a lot better than that.
And that's because of actions that we would take. I mean, left without the right actions, the prospects are pretty deadly. I mean, if we knew what we knew in 1919, this thing could take out many tens of millions of people around the world. Because, like you said, is the key thing here that it's got this sort of strange combination of being certainly more dangerous than flu, not as dangerous as something like Ebola or SARS, but more dangerous than flu by a factor, but infectious, and also infectious before symptoms have started. Is that part of why it's been really hard to respond to?
Right. So Ebola, you're actually flat on your back before you're very infectious. So you're not at church or in a bus or at a store. With most respiratory viruses like the flu and COVID, at first you only feel a little bit of a fever and a little bit sick. And so there's the possibility you're going about your normal activities and infecting other people. And so, human transmissible respiratory viruses that in the early stage aren't stopping you from doing things, that's kind of a worst case. And that's where, I did a flu simulation in the 2015 talk and showed how quickly it spread. Versus 1918, people move around a lot more now than they used to. And so that works against us. Now, the medical system that steps up to treat people is also far, far better.
But when was it clear to you that that unless we acted, this could be a really deadly pandemic?
Well, in January, it was discussed that there was human-human transmission taking place. And so the alarm bells were ringing that this fits the very scary pattern that it will be very difficult to contain. And on January 23rd, China did their equivalent of the shutdown, did it in a fairly extreme form. The very good news is that they were able to reduce the infection rates dramatically because of those actions. But it's January, where everybody should have been on notice. Let's get our act together with testing. Let's get going on therapeutics and vaccines. We've got to get organized, because we have this novel respiratory virus whose infectiousness and fatality put it in that super scary range.
And so what did happen? Because it's such a mystery to me about the sort of the last month of preparation. Certainly, I mean, in many countries, and certainly in the US where we are. Were you on the phone to people during early February, late January, early February, saying, guys, what's going on? This is a really big deal. What are we doing? What was happening behind the scenes during that period?
Well, you'd like to have government money show up for the key activities. We put out $100 million. We created the Therapeutics Accelerator. There's the period between when we realized it was transmitting and now where we should have done more. I think the most important thing to discuss today is that in the area of testing, we're still not creating that capacity and applying it to the people most in need. And so we have health workers who are symptomatic, who can't get a test. And so they don't know, should they go in and not go in? And yet we have lots of tests being given to people who aren't symptomatic. And so the testing thing, to me, it's got to be organized. It's got to be prioritized. That is super, super urgent. The second thing is the isolation that, various parts, just focusing on the US, some parts are doing that in a fairly strong way and other parts not yet. And, it's very hard to do. It's tough on people. It's disastrous for the economy. But the sooner you do it in a tough way, the sooner you can undo it and go back to normal.
So we'll come to the isolation part in a minute, but just sticking with the testing thing, I'm just so confused as to why, with more than a month's notice, I mean, there are so many smart epidemiologists in the US, for example. You plug numbers about infectiousness and fatality into any simulation, and you see that if you don't do anything, millions of people will die. And there's a month. So what's your explanation for what do you think happened here as to why there was almost no test? A month later, there was no viable test in the US. Was this just government complexity, too many chefs in the kitchen? What on earth happened here?
Well, we certainly didn't take advantage of the month of February. The good news is that the actual process, the PCR machines, we have a lot in the United States. And so there's models like South Korea who took advantage of February, built up the testing capacity, and they were able to contact trace, and their infections have gone down, even without the type of shutdown that, because we're late, we're having to do. One thing that is good news just this week is that people had thought to do this test that you had to have a nurse or doctor shove a swab way up all the way to the back of your throat, which hurts a lot, but also you're going to cough and potentially spread the disease to that healthcare worker. So they have to have.
Without objection.
Madam President, senators have been working very hard to respond to the crisis that's facing our whole nation. Each one of us has certain things in our states that might be unique, but we also are here for all of America. And all of America is suffering. I know my staff in Vermont, my staff down here, the appropriation staff have been working every day, every night till midnight or later. Weekends, nobody's had any time off. I've been proud to work with them, even though we have set up, as I would hope all would do, a way so we could teleconference and we can work remotely. Earlier this week, we were faced with the prospect of a bill that was very one-sided. Republicans and Democrats had not done what we do best, sitting down and putting it together. We were given almost a take it or leave it bill. And I applaud Senator Schumer, who said, come back together. Let's not pass that bill, which leaves out so much of America, so much of the people that we represent. Let us come together, both Republicans and Democrats, and find a better bill. Now, late last night, actually, it's close to this morning, agreement was reached in principle on such a bill. The appropriators do only a part of it. But Senator Shelby and I have tried to work together to have something where all the Appropriations Committee, or the vast majority of the Appropriations Committee, Republicans and Democrats would agree, and we did that. And that's what we have before us. I'm sorry that there seems to be some slow up now. I think that senators have, and senators again of both parties, have worked so hard to put together something we can all agree on. We have something we should be able to agree on. We should be able to vote. I agree with the discussions that, speaking of just our party, discussions that Senator Schumer had this morning. We all know that none of us got every single thing we want. And just as I'm sure my Republican friends have not got every single thing they want. And is any bill perfect, especially something of this unprecedented magnitude? Of course not. But we're at a point where reality has to overcome rhetoric. We have to stand up and be the conscience of the nation as we have been in the past and can be today. It is time for senators to come together and vote. I know on our side, Senator Schumer, under his leadership and the others were ready to do that. It's interesting. I don't think people realize that even in our caucus, we go across the political spectrum. We all had different things we wanted. I'm the dean of the Senate. I'm the most senior member here. I have things that I want. I'm not going to get everything I want. Neither is the presiding officer. Neither is anybody here. But America would get a lot more than it has now. A lot more than it has now. Let's do this for America. Let's pass this bill. Let's bring it up. Let's vote on it. Let's stop saying, oh, but yes, you have 98, 99% of what I want, but I've got this other little piece, or I've got this other little piece. No. As Americans, we should say it's reality time, not rhetoric time. Reality trumps rhetoric any day. Let's go ahead and vote. I commend those senators, the Republican Party, and those senators in the Democratic Party who have worked so closely with each other. I know we have in appropriations, but in so many other parts we have. And it's time to say, okay, let's vote. With that, Mr. President, I will suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Wow, that dude was 300 years old. Holy crap. Man. He was struggling and slurring his words and oh my. What in the world? Dude needs some help. He needs to retire. Poor guy. Oh boy. My goodness. Okay, I guess we'll go back to Bill Gates of hell and his latest response on the coronavirus. Now, of course, he did retire. Welcome back, Bolt Gun. Welcome back. We are watching Bill Gates of hell. This is brand new today. Came out. It's a TED Talk, and I'm probably going to get a claim, maybe even a strike for playing this, but I don't care. They can keep attacking my channel and my live streams and videos. It's fine, but I still have my opinion, and I'll still put it out there, and they can deal with it, or they can shove a coronavirus vaccine right up their butts, right where the fake sun doesn't shine.
Protective equipment and change that. What we sent data to the FDA this weekend showing that just a individual by themselves swabbing up to the tip of their nose, the accuracy of that test is essentially the same as having a healthcare worker do it. That helps a lot. We still have to do other things, but that means that you don't have to change protective equipment. You just hand the patient that swab, they do it, put it in the test tube, and if the capacity is right, within 24 hours, you should get that result back.
So how do you see that playing out? Are there people going to massively scale those tests, and how will ordinary citizens be able to get hold of them? And does it still have to be actually kind of prescribed by a doctor at some point, or at some point will you be able to just order them off Amazon or something? And
well, it's pretty chaotic today because the government hasn't stepped in to make sure that the testing capacity is both increased and it's used for the right cases. There'll be a website, and if the federal government doesn't do it, a lot of local governments will have to do it, that you go to, you give your situation, including your symptoms. You're told, based on your work and your symptoms, are you a priority? If so, you're told where there are kiosks you can go to, and you'll do the self-swab and just hand it over. Or eventually, we'll send the kits to you at home, and then you'll send it back and hear that result. Maybe 6 months from now, you'll actually be able to you have a strip where you perform the test in the home. But for now, sending it back for the PCR processing, we can have massive capacity there. And that's how you know the testing is everything, because that's how you know whether you need to do more shutdown or you're starting to get to the point where you can relieve it.
Some people are trying to argue now that almost the testing should be dialed back because the cat is out of the bag. Testing is bringing people together and risking infection. Forget that. Let's just focus on treatment and on isolation strategies. You disagree with that? Testing is still absolutely essential and needs to be scaled.
Well, the two that go together are testing at very high volume and the isolation piece. If you're a medical worker, you want to stay and do your job. If you're making sure the electricity, water, food is still available, you want to do your job. And so testing is what indicates to you, do you need to go into isolation and make sure you're not the source of spread? And so, testing is the key thing. South Korea did that in this massive way that, everybody should learn from. And so that is paired with the isolation piece. Our goal here is to get to the point where a very small percentage of the population is infected. China, only 0.01% of the population was infected. If you don't do these things, you're going to get to the majority of people infected and that huge overload of the medical system.
Whitney has some questions from our online audience. Whitney.
Some of the questions that we're seeing are about how our tech giants and leaders can play a role in isolating this and containing this virus.
The tech companies are very involved in making sure that some work can go on. People can stay in touch. They can help with some of the disease modeling. They can help with the visibility of the numbers. It's actually very impressive. You get up there and you can see, those numbers. Actually, they're sad numbers, but, everybody's able to monitor this thing. Back in 1918, they didn't have this type of visibility and ability to share best practices. But for a lot of people, the isolation is the key thing.
I mean, Bill, one of the riddles about this isolation strategy is how long it has to last, right? Like a lot of people are concerned that the price of victory by isolating everyone is that you crash the economy and that, we have to be basically at home, not doing our regular jobs for 3, 6 months, maybe all year. and so much so that there's now this big debate in the US and other countries about this may just be the wrong strategy, that we can't crash the economy that badly. We should only isolate for another couple of weeks and then let people back. And if that means, a lot of other people get sick and we eventually build up herd immunity, that may be the right way to go. What's your thought on this? What is the isolation strategy that eventually leads to us getting back to normal?
And it's very tough to say to people, hey, keep going to restaurants, go buy new houses. Ignore that pile of bodies over in the corner. Just, we want you to keep spending because there's some, maybe a politician who thinks GDP growth is what really counts. It's very hard to tell people when there's an epidemic spreading that, threatens particularly their parents or elderly people that they know, that they should go about things knowing that their activity is spreading this disease. I don't know of any rich countries that have chosen to use that approach. It is true if you did that approach over a period of several years, enough people would be infected, you'd have what's called herd immunity. But herd immunity is meaningless until you infect over half the population. And so you'll overload your medical system. So your case fatality rate, instead of being 1%, will be like 3-4%. And so, the idea, it's very irresponsible for somebody to suggest we can have the best of both worlds. What we need is the extreme shutdown so that in 6 to 10 weeks, if things go well, then you can start opening back up.
So just putting the math together from what you just said, Bill, to get to herd immunity, you need more than half the people in the country to basically get the bug. So in the case of the US, for example, that would be 150 million people thereabouts. You said that there could be the fatality rate in that scenario. You're talking about 4 to 5 million people in that potential fatalities. I mean, it's that's just a horrifying scenario that no one should be contemplating.
Even 1% of their population getting sick, they will treat whoever goes for this ignore the disease strategy. They will treat them as a pariah state. So none of their people will go in, and none of your people will go into that. And so briefly, a few countries in Europe that hadn't really looked at this hard considered, okay, should we be the ones who kind of go about business as usual? It is tempting because if you got there early, South Korea did not have to do the extreme shutdown because they did such a good job on testing. And, that's why it's so maddening to me that the government's not allocating the testing to where it's needed. And maybe that'll have to happen at the state level because it's not happening at the federal level. But there is no middle course on this thing. It is sad that the shutdown will be harder for poorer countries than it is for richer countries.
So let's come into that in a minute. But just the one exception I've heard the case made for is Japan, that Japan has not contained it quite in the same way that South Korea did, but has allowed people to work. It's tried to make extreme measures for protecting the most elderly population, but they've tried to sort of they've tried to find a middle scenario, haven't they?
Well, if you act when you have hundreds of cases, you may be able to contain it by doing great testing and great contact tracing and restricting foreigners coming in without as much damage to your economy. The U.S. has passed this opportunity to control without shutdown, so that the worst case of what was happening in Wuhan in the beginning or in northern Italy, the last few weeks, that we avoid that. But we did not act fast enough to have an ability to avoid the shutdown.
But then what I don't understand in the case of the US, for example, is that even if we're successful in bending the curve and reducing the number of new cases from a period of extreme shutdown, as it were, no immunity has been built up. Let's say that there's still no vaccine. Surely when you lift restrictions and people start going back to work, the whole thing just blows up again.
The experience that we're seeing in China and in South Korea is that there are not these people who are asymptomatic that are causing lots of infections. And that's a parameter that as you build the model, you have to put in. If there's an imperial model that people talk about a lot, which shows that reopening is very hard to do, but the results of that model are not matching what we see in China. And so very likely there aren't as many of these infecting asymptomatics. And that's why you have to be pragmatic. There's a lot we don't know. For example, seasonality may help us in the Northern Hemisphere. The force of infection will, respiratory viruses, to some degree, they all are seasonal. We don't know how seasonal this one is, but there's a reasonable chance that the force of infection will be going down. And it's your testing that always is telling you, oh my gosh, do I have to shut down more or can I start to open up? So particularly right as you open up, that testing and contact tracing is saying to you, and I'm, you can say I'm on the more optimistic side that it will be possible to do what China's doing, where they are starting to go back to normal.
And help me understand what happened there, because it seems kind of miraculous to me, because this virus was exploding, yes, in Wuhan, but people moved from there to many other parts of China. How is it possible that the combination of the shutdown in Wuhan and measures elsewhere seem to have got to the point where there are literally no new cases happening? I mean, to me, that implies that literally the virus is not circulating at all between humans in China. There's a few tourists coming in who they deal with, but I mean, how on earth, is that literally your interpretation of what happened? That it's no longer circulating in China?
What you do is take a spreadsheet and take a number like 4. One person affects 4 people, and say the cycle, is every 10 days. Go through, 8 of those cycles, and you're getting a big number. Start with 10,000, and then, that increase. If you take the number 0.4 instead, that is the average case infects 0.4 people, which then look at what happens to that number as you go out. It drops to 0. And so things that are exponential are very, very dramatic. When they're above 1, they are growing rapidly. When they're below 1, they're shrinking rapidly. And so the isolation in China drove that reproductive number to well below 0. And so local infection rates below 1, sorry.
Yeah.
And it's that quarantine, quarantine comes from 40 days, which is what they thought would help for Black Plague. That is our primary technique. Thank God we have testing if we use it properly. We are, doing therapeutics, which will help with the death rate. But in terms of the keeping infections below 1% of the population, it's really all depends just on the 2 things, isolation and testing.
So to quote a question from my Twitter feed this morning for you, Bill, if you were president for a month in the US, what would be the top 2 or 3 things you would do?
Well, the clear message that we have no choice to maintain this isolation, and that's going to keep going for a period of time, probably in the Chinese case, it was like 6 weeks. So we have to prepare ourselves for that and do it very well, and then use the testing and every week talk about what's going on with that. If you're doing isolation well, within about 20 days, you'll see those numbers really change. Instead of this, you'll see this. And that is a sign that you're on your way. Now you have to stay to get those more generations that are, 0.4 infections per previous infection. You have to maintain it for a number of weeks there. And, so this is not going to be easy. We need a clear message about that. It is really tragic that the economic effects of this are very dramatic. I mean, nothing like this has ever happened to the economy in our lifetimes. But money, bringing the economy back and doing money, that's more of a reversible thing than bringing people back to life. And so we're going to take the pain in the economic dimension, huge pain, in order to minimize the pain in the disease and death dimension.
Whitney.
So we have a lot of other questions coming in. One of the ones that we've been seeing is this question about what tools are available for countries that maybe don't have the luxury of being able to social distance, don't have great health systems in place. How should they be handling this virus?
Yeah, I would say that if the rich countries really do their job well, by the summer, they'll be like China is, or some of the other countries that responded early. But in the developing countries, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, the seasonality is large. As you say, the ability to isolate, when you go out to get your food every day, you have to earn your wage. When you live in a slum where you're very nearby each other, it's very hard to do as you move down the income ladder than it is for a country like the United States. And so we should all, accelerate the vaccine, which eventually will come. And, people are being responsible to say that, that's going to take 18 months. And there's a lot of those being pursued. I'm talking a lot with Seth Berkley, who you're going to have later this week, who can talk a lot about the vaccine front because he's definitely at the center of that, at being the head of Gavi. We do need to get really cheap testing out to these countries, and we need to get therapeutics so you don't need to put 5% of people on respirators, because even if they have the equipment, they don't have the personnel. They just don't have the beds, the capacity. And so the only good news is that the rich countries have this, And so they will be learning about testing therapeutics and funding the vaccines for the entire world to try and minimize the damage in developing countries.
Great. I'll be back later with more questions.
Bill, you mentioned therapeutics there. What is looking promising? Is anything looking promising?
Yeah, so there's quite a range of things going on. There's a few that get mentioned a lot, remdesivir, hydrochloroquine, azithromycin. And the data is still a bit confusing, but there's some positive data on those. Remdesivir is a 5-day IV infusion and actually kind of hard to manufacture. So people are looking at how that can be improved. The hydrochloroquine looks like it works somewhat if you get in early. There are a huge list of compounds, including antibodies, antiviral drugs. And so the Gates Foundation and Wellcome Trust, with support from MasterCard and now others, created this therapeutic accelerator to really triage out. You have hundreds of people showing up and saying, try this, try that. So we look at lab assays, animal models, and so we understand which things should be prioritized for these very quick human trials that need to be done all over the world. And so the coordination on that is very complex globally. But I think, out of the top 20 or so candidates, probably 3 or 4 of them will work out, at different stages of the disease to reduce the respiratory distress.
I heard you mention that one possibility might be treatments from the serum, the blood serum of people who had the disease and recovered. So I guess they're carrying antibodies. Talk a bit about that, about how that could work and what it would take to accelerate that.
Yeah, this has always been discussed, is how could you pull that off? So people who are recovered, it appears, have really effective antibodies in their blood. So you could go transfuse them and only take out the white cells, the immune cells. And then the question is, okay, how many patients worth of material could you get? If you have that recovered person come in, say, once a week, do you get enough for 2 people or 5 people? Then logistically, you have to take that and get it to where that need is. And so it's fairly complicated. Compared to a drug that we can make in high volume, the cost of taking it out and putting it back in probably doesn't scale as well. But there is work being done on this. We actually started with Ebola. Unfortunately, it got done before it was needed. So that is being pursued, and it'll work to some degree, but it'll be hard to scale the numbers.
So it's almost like when you talk about the need to accelerate testing, the immediate need is for testing for the virus. But is it possible that in a few months' time that there's going to be this growing need to test for these antibodies in people, to see if someone had the disease and recovered? Maybe they didn't even know they had it. Because you could picture this growing worldwide force of heroes, let's call them heroes, who've been through this experience and have a lot to offer the world. Maybe they can offer, like blood donation, serum donation, but also other tasks. Like if you've got overwhelmed healthcare systems, presumably there are kind of community health worker type tasks that people could be trained to do to relieve the pressure there, if we knew that they were effectively immune?
Yes, until we came up with the self-swab and showed FDA that that's equivalent, we were thinking the people who might be able to man those kiosks would be the recovered patients. Now, we don't want to have a lot of recovered people. To be clear, we're trying through the shutdown in the United States to not get to 1% of the population infected. We're well below that today, but with exponentiation, you could get past that 3 million. I believe we will be able to avoid that with the having this economic pain. Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control. Sadly, you don't want to completely block off the ability for those people to go there and come back and move around.
Bill, is your foundation helping to accelerate the manufacture of these self-tests? What are the prospects for really seeing scale on some of this testing soon, not just in the US, but globally?
Yeah, our foundation, we'd been funding a thing called the flu study to really understand how respiratory viruses spread. It's amazing how little was understood about how important schools are, different age groups, different types of interaction. And that gave us an experience. In fact, that flu study actually was the first time coronavirus was found in the community, because the government was still saying you only test people who come from China. But we ran into people who had coronavirus who hadn't been travelers. So, that was like an early warning sign, even though the regulation said you weren't supposed to even look at that. So, the foundation is working with all the private sector people, the diagnostics people on this testing piece. Now that we can do the self-swab, those swabs are very easy to manufacture. The one where you had to jam it into the throat, deep turbinate, that was getting into short supply. So the swab, should not be limiting. Neither should the various chemicals that help run the PCR machine. So we should be able to get to a South Korea type prioritized testing thing within a few weeks.
How important is it that the world's nations collaborate right now? I mean, it seems like, here's this common enemy facing humanity. It does not know that it just crossed a border. It does not know what race people are, what religion they are. It just knows, here's a human. I've got a manufacturing machine here that can make me famous, and it goes to work. It's so terrifying to me to see signs of countries starting to blame each other, or the xenophobia just seems so toxic. What's your take on this, Bill? Is there anything? Do you see signs of cooperation happening, or are you also worried about the sort of US versus China kind of thing that seems to be going on if we're not careful?
Well, I see both. I see that countries that are recovered can help other countries. And that, that's fantastic. If by the summer we've knocked this thing down, then great, we can help other countries. There are vaccine projects all over the world, and those should be evaluated on a very neutral basis to which one is the best to help humanity, and make sure the manufacturing capacity isn't just for rich countries, that it's scaled up, very low cost stuff for the entire world. And that's the spirit of Gavi, is getting vaccines out to every person. So you see it really good in the science side and data sharing side, you see this great cooperation going on. Unfortunately, whenever you have disease, this sense of other and foreign and, oh, stay away from me, that sort of pulling inward is reinforced. And we have to avoid that. Ironically, we have to isolate physically, while in terms of looking at community groups that are pooling resources to help make sure food gets to everyone and help sure medical care, and that, if older people need to be moved out of common facilities, you help out with that, and that, people aren't suffering too much from the psychology of isolation. So our generosity has to go out towards others at the same time where we're less actually physically interacting with other people.
I mean, thinking about the situation in many developing countries, I'm curious how you think of this. I mean, you mentioned, first of all, that seasonality may help, i.e. high temperatures. Is it possible that is so far protecting, to some extent, places like India or sub-Saharan Africa and so forth?
India's northern hemisphere. So southern hemisphere is lots of Africa, South America, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia. And it is true, either the force of infection is lower there, or we're just not seeing it with testing. A few months from now, we'll understand the seasonality question, which would be good news for the northern hemisphere and somewhat bad news for the southern hemisphere. Now, more people live in the northern hemisphere, including, India, Pakistan, and that would buy us some time. The time is a big deal because all these tools get so much better if you had to go into a second season with it. But yes, sadly, we could see in the next few months, as the southern hemisphere is moving into its fall and then winter, we could see a big increase there. And that is going to be very difficult. Now, they don't have as many older people, but they have lots of people who have who are HIV positive or have malnutrition or various lung challenges because of indoor smoke. And so the wild card is, how well can the developing countries deal with this?
I mean, if you're in a country where you have the majority of your populations making less than $2 or $3 a day, can you even afford a strategy that looks like basically shutting down the economy?
I'm very worried that there will be a massive number of deaths in those poor countries because the health systems just aren't, the number of respirators, hospitals. And of course, when you overload that system, your deaths are not just COVID deaths, but everyone else who's trying to access a system that will be somewhat in chaos, including with health workers who are getting sick.
Okay, we're getting near to running out of time with this. Whitney, maybe a last question or two from online.
Sure. So we have two from online. We're seeing thousands of questions around these same lines. One, there's lots of people who are really interested to hear about the kind of work that you're doing with your foundation as far as distributing tests, but also producing safety gear, masks, and that sort of thing to help with this effort for health workers.
Yeah, so the Gates Foundation, we very early on gave out $100 million to help out with all the pieces, the testing piece, the therapeutics, and the vaccines. We are not experts in making masks and ventilators and gowns, and it's great that other people, including some 3D printing and open source things, that is great. Our focus, like this self-swab thing, nobody had done that before. People thought it wouldn't work, we were quite sure it would work. And so that for the globe is a huge thing. We work a lot with both governments and private sector. So in some ways, we're kind of a bridge. And, so we've been talking to the head of the pharmaceutical companies and the testing companies, and specifically with the ones doing vaccines, including some of which are these new type of vaccines, RNA vaccines that we've been backing, for quite some time, and CEPI has been backing. And so our expertise is in those medical tools and really getting the best of the private sector engaged there. It's been a little slow. We can write checks, right away, whereas the government processes, even in this situation, there's still this notion of bidding and not really knowing who has the unique capabilities of doing things. And, so an organization that's working on this all the time, lots of new vaccines, can step in and be helpful. And it's really amazing. When we talk to private sector partners, their interest in helping out has been absolutely fantastic. And, so that's where we have a unique role.
That's great. And I mean, and the other question that we're just seeing a ton of before we wrap up here is it's just people are really interested in your insight, Bill, on whether you think we're heading in the right direction. Do you feel like our economy is heading in the right place, that humanity is heading in the right place? Are we in a better position now than you thought we were in 5 years ago?
Well, 5 years ago, I said that the pandemic is this unaddressed, very, very scary thing. And that, if we did the right things, we could be more prepared. Science is on our side. The fact we can be ready for the next epidemic, it's very clear how to do that. And yes, it will take tens of billions, but not hundreds or trillions of dollars. It'll be tiny compared to the economic cost. I remember when I did that presentation in 2015, I put up a big flu epidemic could cost $4 trillion. And I thought, wow, that's a big number. Do I really think it's that big? And I went and looked at the numbers. I thought, yeah, well, that's big. This epidemic will cost that much to the economy. So in the short run, we are going to have more pain and more difficulty, and people are going to have to step up to help each other. I'm still very much an optimist, whether it's climate change, countries working together, biology taking the diseases, malaria, TB, even advances for what are more ritual diseases like cancer. The amount of innovation, the way we can connect up and work together, yes, I'm super positive about that. I love my work because I see progress on all these diseases all the time. Now we have to, turn and focus on this. Sadly, it may interrupt, and the polio situation might get worse a little bit because of the distraction here. We're using a lot of the great capacity that was built up for those polio activities to try and help the developing countries respond to this very well, and that is appropriate. But the message for me, although it's very sober when we're dealing with this epidemic, I'm very positive that this should draw us together. We will get out of this, and then we will get ready for the next epidemic.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, Bill, which is where's your head? Do you think we will get through this? Will the leaders that matter listen to the scientists? Will they? Will we make it through? Do you believe that within a few months' time, we're going to be already looking back and saying, we dodged a pretty bad one there?
We can't say for sure that even the rich countries will be out of this in 6 to 10 weeks. I think that's likely, but as we get the testing data, we'll get more of a sense of that, and people will continuously be able to see that. But, the rich countries will get out of this. The developing countries will bear a significant price, but even we will get a vaccine, and Gavi will get that out to everyone. So, 2 to 3 years from now, this thing, even on a global basis, will essentially be over with a gigantic price tag. But now we're going to know, okay, next time we see a pathogen, we can make billions of tests within 2 or 3 weeks. We can figure out which antiviral drugs work within 2 or 3 weeks and get those scaled up. And we can make a vaccine, if we're really ready, probably in 6 months, using these new platforms, probably the RNA vaccine. So specifically, there are innovations that are there that will get financed, I hope quite generously coming out of this thing. And so 3 years from now, we'll look back and say, that was awful. There's a lot of heroes, but we've learned the lesson, and the world as a whole, with its great science and desire to help each other, was able to try and minimize what happened there and avoid it happening again.
That's certainly the optimistic scenario that I'm craving for myself, that the world kind of realizes, one, that there are certain things that you just have to unite on. Two, that science really matters, and that it's a miracle that science can understand this bug make a vaccine, sequence it, make therapeutics, understand how to model it. It's kind of miraculous to me. So will we learn now to pay attention to scientists? Because if we do, I'm sure that you feel this as well, there's an amazing analog, right, with climate. It's just a different time scale. That the scientists are out there saying, there's this huge enemy coming. If we do nothing, it's going to take millions of lives. It's going to wreck our planet. For God's sake, act, politicians, do something. And the politicians are going, no, we need a little more GDP. We need to win an election. And they're not acting. Do you see a scenario where this shocks politicians to actually change their thinking and their prioritization of science overall, or is that asking too much?
Yeah, it's interesting how much of this distraction will delay the urgent innovation agenda that exists over in climate. I have freed up a lot of time to work on climate. I have to say, for the last few months, that's now shifted. And until we get out of this crisis, COVID will dominate. And so some of the climate stuff, although it'll still go on, it won't get that same focus. As we get past this, yes, that idea of innovation and science and the world working together, that is totally common between these two problems. And so I don't think this has to be a huge setback for climate.
So last question, there are thousands of people watching, many of them living alone, some scared. There may even be people there who have this virus and suffering symptoms or recovering. By the way, if that's you, we'd love to hear from you. We really would. Maybe have a conversation with some of you just, in a future one of these, just understanding the experience. But Bill, what can people do as individuals from their own homes right now to try and help?
Well, there's a lot of creativity. Can you mentor kids who are being forced into an online format where the school systems really weren't ready for that? Can you organize some giving activity that gets the food banks to step up where there's problems there? These are such unprecedented times, and it really should draw out that sense of creativity while complying with the isolation mandates.
Well, Bill, I really want to thank you for spending this time with us and for the financial investment, the time investment. You've really invested your life into trying to solve these big problems, and this is as big as they get. I have a hunch that your voice is really going to be needed in the next few weeks. Thank you so much for your time today. This was really wonderful hearing from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for being part of the tech community. Look after yourselves. Be smart about this.
Wow, that load of crap's over with. Wow. You're welcome, Tom. Tom, thanks for listening in, watching. Appreciate you. Appreciate you, Bolt Gun, and everyone else that's been here this whole time. I was hoping they would get on and get the vote over with, but looks like they're still lollygagging around. Let's see here. But they are like they're waiting, the chairman's there and all these people here. So who knows? Maybe they'll start soon on that. Yep. Oh, man. Crazy. An old Bill Gates of hell. Garbage. He is so garbage. Full of garbage. All right, let's see what's going on. See who's live, all that kind of good stuff. We have the global news with their crap, the coronavirus. Brian Staveley's premiering right now. Coronavirus, Trump task force to hold daily briefing. That's supposed to be at 5, but that probably won't be until who knows when. Let's see. We'll go ahead and look at it though. See if it's planned. And they're just waiting still. So we're waiting on the Senate and President Trump. President Trump and the Trump get along gang. Look, These people aren't 6 feet apart. Yeah, they might be this way, but not this way. See, this way. It's so stupid, man. This used to be all full of people. See, the sign tells them they have to be 6 feet apart, but they're not 6 feet apart. Look, they're not 6 feet apart, and he's not 6 feet apart. They're not 6 feet apart. They're not 6 feet apart. Look at all this, people that are not 6 feet apart. So they know this shit's fake, man. They know they ain't got nothing to worry about. Ridiculous. Ridiculous, man. Crazy. All right, well, while we're waiting, I'm going to play a song and go feed my cat. So if I hear it come on, then I'll come and stop the song. Maybe I'll play something else instead of a song. I don't know. We'll see here. Hang on. Again, just waiting on the Senate to reconvene to vote on the money situation. And then over here, we're waiting on the president and his game. All right, we'll check out Richie from Boston's video here.
Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's Richie from Boston, and it's the 25th of March in the year 2020. And I have been shouting from the rooftops. I have been shouting from state to state to state for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks that the people that run the actual world, not just the Democrats and the Republicans and political theater and Donald Trump, none of that shit is real. These people are criminals. I have been yelling from the rooftops that this entire pandemic was completely and totally fake. It's not real. They're using it to force you to get a vaccine. They're using it to destroy the dollar and steal the remaining wealth of everyone you know. Period. Period. But nobody seems to want to listen. So I bring on doctors, and they tell you the same thing. Viruses cannot go airborne. You can only get some type of sickness if it's injected in you. You can't have somebody sneeze in a room and everyone gets sick. And yet you can't go 6 feet next to anybody else. We have people in Indiana sending me copies of their work paperwork where they'll get fired if they're within 6 feet of anyone else. With all that going on and nobody believing what's going on because they want to hide behind their toilet paper, this comes out. A subscriber just sent me this. This is from the government of the UK. Let's go down here real quick. Crown copyright. Yes, I find that very strange. Crown Corona. I get it. But let's go up here. Published October 21st, 2018. Last updated March 21st, 2020. Status of COVID-19. As of 19th March 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease in the UK. Okay? I'll leave all the rest of this if you like to read bullshit, but here it is from the government of the United Kingdom. Wake up! This entire thing is making you sit in your house like a pussy, waiting for the National Guard and whatever other troops to surround your area and making you dance around like a puppet, like an idiot, like an absolute fool non-American. Well, none of this is even real. This is exactly what it looks like. They've shut down the world. They've stolen everything. They're seizing power. They're tricking the military, I hope. And meanwhile, everything I've been telling you is right here. It isn't contagious because you can't get a disease like they're telling you at all. And even if you could, it wouldn't make any difference because as of 2020 is no longer considered a high consequence infectious. Really? Then why is every business in the United States shut down? Why are the highways shut down? Why are people hiding in their houses like absolute cowards? You've got the facts. Now stand up. Be on the right side of history. Or don't. Enjoy the New World Order. Fortunately, I won't be here. I'm out.
All right, that was Richie from Boston. Always good stuff from him. Still waiting on the chump, and still waiting on the senators, S-I-N, senators. Man, oh man. This is crazy. Just waiting. Waiting. Lots of waiting. Go back to subscription. Excuse me. It's 4:44 here. Well, maybe I'll come back on live at some point when they get their act together, I guess. Go ahead and end this stream before they decide to pull it down anyway or something. Appreciate everybody that was here, joining in, chatting, and all that good stuff, watching, putting the 2 cents in. It's always fun to hang with you guys, like-minded people. Repent, prepare, watch, and witness until the end, guys. Tommy here, Tommy out. Thank you so much.